There was a time when one building told you who ruled American shopping. The Sears Tower didn't just dominate the Chicago skyline, it was a concrete announcement that Sears dominated American life. At its peak in the 1960s, this company touched roughly 1% of U.S. GDP, a single retailer threaded through paychecks, living rooms, garages, and closets. Before anyone had heard of big tech, Sears was big retail, big credit, and big aspirations rolled into one empire. Let me take you back to an America where the internet was a distant fantasy, and the most powerful algorithm was a thick, yellow catalog dropped on the kitchen table. Sears owned the American consumer through paper and patience. One book gave a family its bed, its tools, its school clothes, even the house itself. It reached into rural poverty and suburban comfort alike, turning mailboxes into miniature department stores and teaching a generation how to buy on credit long before plastic cards filled wallets. But that towering confidence hit a clock that was already ticking. Fast forward to 2018, the same name that once crowned the tallest building in the world is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Once busy Sears anchors sit as hollow shells at the edge of dying malls, escalators frozen, fluorescent lights off, entire floors silent except for the echo of a security gate closing for the last time. This isn't just a failed company, it's a fallen empire, a reminder that in capitalism, even kings don't retire, they get replaced. And the usurper did not arrive in a skyscraper. It rolled in on pickup trucks and gravel parking lots. Walmart began as a small-town Arkansas discounter with no brand prestige, no serious money, and no skyline. Just a farm boy named Sam Walton, obsessed with logistics and low prices, walking store aisles with a yellow legal pad, counting inventory while Sears executives compared golf handicaps. Not only did that quiet operation survive, it grew into the largest retailer and private employer on earth. Here is the unsettling question. How does a company that once put America's homes, tools, and clothes into a single catalog lose to a chain of bare-bones boxes run by a man who measured power in truck turns and warehouse throughput? How does the master of the mail order network lose the future to the master of the supply chain network? Because this is not just retail history, it's an example of what happens when an empire mistakes its symbols for its strength. Sears thought the crown was real estate, catalogs, and brand. Walmart treated the crown as information, speed, and ruthless operational discipline. The handover from Sears Tower to Bentonville's back offices is a blueprint for how power shifts in capitalism, and a warning that today's giants may already be quietly handing their crowns to tomorrow's upstarts. In the next chapter, that handover begins in the most unlikely battlefield, small-town America. Small-town America was the battlefield, but the real war was philosophical. Sears and Walmart weren't just two retailers, they were two answers to the same question. What is power in a consumer empire? One side thought power lived in skyscrapers, real estate, and financial engineering. The other thought power lived in warehouses, data, and the relentless movement of boxes. There was a time when Sears looked almost untouchable. At its peak in the 1960s, it was the largest retailer in the world, responsible for roughly 1% of U.S. GDP, with a brand that sat in the same mental space as the flag and the post office. This was the company that helped build the American middle class, that sold the family everything from socks to entire prefab houses, that turned shopping into a national pastime. His story is one of ambition on an industrial scale, at times inspiring, and at times chilling. Because Sears didn't just sell products, it taught a country how to live. Through its catalog, it reached farms, mining towns, and city blocks that big city merchants ignored, extending credit, standardizing prices, and quietly setting expectations for what a decent life could look like. It is an example of what happens when a business taps directly into aspiration and uses logistics to erase the distance between poverty and possibility. But over time, that same empire began to believe its own legend. Success hardened into arrogance. The catalog that had once been a weapon turned into an afterthought. Executives became more interested in turning Sears into a financial supermarket, insurance, brokerage, real estate, than in sweating over inventory turns or delivery speed. Meetings multiplied. Decisions slowed. The company that once obsessed over the customer's mailbox now obsessed over the balance sheet. Meanwhile, down in Arkansas, Sam Walton was building something very different. Walmart's philosophy was brutally simple: everyday low prices, enforced by ruthless operational discipline. Logistics was not a support function, it was warfare. Private trucks, cross-docking warehouses, a private satellite network linking thousands of stores and suppliers in near real time, all aimed at one thing: move goods faster and cheaper than anyone else, then pass the savings on before rivals even know what happened. Sears drifted into bureaucracy, while Walmart treated information as oxygen. One side assumed its name, and real estate would protect it. The other side assumed nothing was secure and measured everything that moved. When a company forgets what game it's really playing, customers, information, speed, someone hungrier will quietly rewrite the rules, and then, finally, the entire map. So let me take you back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Sears was the disruptor. Before Walmart ruled Main Street, Sears ruled America's mailboxes, proving that data, logistics, and reach could overturn the old order. And yet, the same company that taught Americans to shop by mail would later miss the internet, underestimate data, and watch its crown pass to Bentonville. The uncomfortable question is whether today's tech and retail giants are already developing the same blind spots. Because this isn't just the story of Sears versus Walmart, it's a parable about how wealth, power, and comfort can turn pioneers into prey. In the next part, the catalog kingdom is born, and the clock toward digital oblivion quietly starts. There was a time when shopping in America did not mean malls, brands, or endless choice. It meant one dim room, one counter, and one man who knew he had you trapped. Before the catalog kingdom was born, the country was already wired for a retail revolution, but almost no one could see it. Let me take you back to the late 1800s. Most Americans did not live in big cities with grand department stores. They lived in scattered farm towns, miles from the nearest railroad depot, where life revolved around weather, harvests, and the local general store. That store sold everything and nothing at the same time. A few barrels of flour, some tools, maybe a pair of boots in the wrong size, all at prices that felt less like market rates and more like ransom. Because those merchants controlled access to goods, they controlled something even more powerful: time. A farmer might lose an entire day hitching up the wagon, traveling 10 or 20 miles, only to arrive and find that the nails were out of stock, the fabric was cheap and rough, and the sugar cost more this month because the railroad raised rates. There was no price transparency, no national standard, just rumors and receipts written in fading ink. In the cities, the story was different. New department stores were emerging, stacked with manufactured goods, showing off the early wealth of an industrial empire. City families could browse, compare, and haggle. Rural families paid whatever the local merchant demanded, It is an example of what happens when information moves slowly. Money and power pool. In the places where prices are hidden and options are few. Yet beneath this unfair surface, the country was quietly changing. Railroads were knitting distant regions together, flinging steel tracks across prairies that had only recently been frontier. The Postal Service expanded into small towns and rural routes, turning lonely post offices into tiny doors to the outside world. Factories in Chicago, New York, and beyond were churning out standardized goods, but there was still no clean, direct line from those factory floors to the farmhouse kitchen table. The infrastructure existed. The business model did not. Manufacturers sold to jobbers, jobbers to wholesalers, wholesalers to local merchants, and every hand in that chain took a cut. Prices mutated along the way, like a long game of telephone played with other people's savings. The result was predictable and at times inspiring and at times chilling. Booming urban markets, stubborn rural poverty, and a vast invisible opportunity sitting in the middle. What if someone could standardize prices so a farmer in Kansas paid the same as a clerk in Chicago? What if inventory could be centralized in giant warehouses instead of scattered across thousands of tiny stores? What if the mail itself could be weaponized to bypass every middleman, dropping the empire of the city directly into the farmhouse mailbox? Sears would be the first to answer those questions, turning catalogs, railroads, and postal routes into a machine that felt unstoppable. But as you will see, the same logic that lifted Sears over the general store would one day be used, far more ruthlessly, by a company from Bentonville. The danger was simple. Miss the next wave of infrastructure, and the crown you forged from paper and rail might quietly be claimed by silicon and satellite. And in the next part, when the first thick Sears catalog lands on a lonely kitchen table, that danger is the last thing anyone can see. There was a time when a watch was not a fashion accessory, but a precision tool that told a man whether his train, his cargo, and his money would arrive on time. Let me take you back to a tiny railroad station in North Redwood, Minnesota in 1886, where a 22-year-old station agent named Richard Sears was about to turn a minor shipping mistake into the seed of a retail empire. One day, a crate of pocket watches arrived from Chicago. The local jeweler took one look at the shipment, refused it, and walked away. To the railroad, it was just a headache. To Sears, it was an opening. He negotiated to buy the watches at a steep discount, then quietly began offering them to other station agents up and down the line, men who needed accurate time but hated paying jeweler prices. He undercut the town shops, sold the entire batch, and made a profit that dwarfed his station salary. More important than the money, he had discovered something about distance. Most merchants saw distance as a wall. Sears saw it as cover. Station agents were scattered across thousands of lonely miles, but they all read the same railroad circulars. So he placed simple ads, wrote confident copy, and promised quality watches at prices that sounded almost suspicious. To neutralize that suspicion, he flooded his letters with guarantees. If the watch failed, he would refund. If it disappointed, he would replace. Because of those written promises and that almost aggressive reassurance, strangers who would never meet him in person began sending cash to a man they knew only from ink on paper. His story is one of words turning into warehouses. Every line in those early ads was a test. Which headline pulled more orders? Which phrase calmed fear? Which guarantee unlocked another distant town? Sears was learning, piece by piece, that in a world of mistrust and uneven quality, persuasive copy and ironclad guarantees were not decoration. They were infrastructure, at times inspiring and at times chilling. This was the moment when trust itself started to feel like something that could be engineered. But Sears was not a watchmaker. For that, he found Alva Roebuck, a quiet, technically minded repairman who could take apart a bulky movement and coax it back to life. While Sears wrote ads, answered letters, and pushed volume ever higher, Roebuck handled the repairs, the specifications, the fine print that kept the promises real. One man sold the dream. The other made sure it ticked. And then came the realization that would change American life. If he could sell watches by mail to scattered station agents, why not stoves to farmers, suits to clerks, even entire households to families who had never seen a department store? It was an example of what happens when a small, accidental success collides with a mind obsessed with scale. The watch crate had been a fluke. The catalog empire it foreshadowed would be anything but. There was a time when power in American retail didn't live in glass towers or on glowing screens. It lived in a thick brick of paper dropped into a dusty mailbox at the end of a dirt road. The Sears catalog didn't just sell products. It rewired how an entire nation thought about choice, money, and what a family's life could look like. Let me take you back to the 1890s. A farmer's nearest store might be a general shop 20 miles away, where the owner set prices by gut feeling and gossip. Then, one day, a book the size of a Bible arrives, printed with a single ruthless promise: the same price for everyone, everywhere. Hundreds of pages. Boots, Bibles, sewing machines, rifles, wedding rings, even entire house kits. It was the Amazon of its day, only heavier, slower, and somehow even more shocking. Because Sears printed fixed national prices, the local merchant's quiet monopoly suddenly looked like a scam. Because the catalog offered money-back guarantees and plain language descriptions, the mysterious world of manufactured goods became legible to people who had never seen a department store. The cause was simple ink on paper. The effect was a tidal shift in trust. Rural customers stopped feeling trapped. They could compare, choose, return. That wasn't just convenience, it was power. Behind that promise stood an operational machine as cold and disciplined as any modern logistics network. Sears built giant centralized warehouses, stacked to the rafters with inventory, organized by codes and numbers that turned chaos into a system. Orders flowed in by mail, were sorted by clerks on long wooden tables, packed in crates, and pushed out onto rail lines that spidered across the continent. Partnerships with railroads and the expanding postal service meant the company could ship almost anything to almost anywhere, from a single watch to enough lumber and nails to assemble a two-story home. Inside the house, though, the empire looked different. Families gathered around the catalog after dinner like it was a shared national dream. Children circled bicycles, dresses, and toy trains in pencil. Parents lingered over parlor sets, washing machines, even gravestones, quietly measuring their own progress from poverty to modest wealth. The catalog was entertainment, aspiration, and education all in one, a symbol of modernity that said, "You are part of the same America as the city banker and the Chicago clerk." Then comes the pattern break. The company that taught millions to shop remotely, to trust a brand they never saw in person, would later stare at the internet and treat it as a side project. It's an example of what happens when an empire forgets the logic of its own rise. Sears had already proven that distance could be conquered by information, by descriptions and guarantees traveling faster than wagons. Yet when the next revolution arrived, it hesitated, even as a new challenger was quietly studying the same rural landscapes Sears once dominated. Because while Sears was binding the country together through mail and rail, another merchant would learn to use concrete, highways, and data to finish the job. There was a time when Sears didn't just deliver packages, it delivered a lifestyle. For millions of families who had grown up with candles, outhouses, and hand-me-downs, Sears quietly offered something far more radical than a new stove or a shiny bicycle. It offered a way into the American middle-class dream, payable in small monthly bites. Let me take you back to the moment when that dream met a payment plan. Sears looked at a factory worker making a few dollars a day and asked a dangerous question. Why wait? Instead of saving for years, that worker could order a cast iron range, an icebox, later a washing machine, and pay it off over time. Installment plans turned someday purchases into right-now decisions. A family could cook on a modern stove, listen to a radio, sleep on real mattresses, long before the money was fully there. The risk was real, but so was the pull. Credit became a household guest. Because Sears trusted the customer's future earnings more than their present savings, entire rooms changed. Kitchens upgraded, bedrooms filled, parlor furniture appeared where crates once sat. This was not charity. It was disciplined, profitable finance wrapped in warm domestic imagery, and it trained a generation to see monthly payments as normal, even comforting. The bill came in the same mail that brought the catalog dreams. Then Sears went further. It stopped at nothing less than the house itself. Through its famous kit homes, Sears sold entire dwellings by mail, shipping pre-cut lumber, doors, windows, nails, and plans by rail to small towns and empty lots. A train would arrive laden with someone's future, and over a few weekends, with neighbors and relatives lifting beams, that pile of labeled boards became a 2-story home with a front porch and indoor plumbing. For families leaving poverty behind, it felt like magic written in 2 horse. His story is one of empire building, not just on city blocks, but in cul-de-sacs and farm roads. Sears didn't just sell the sofa, it sold the walls around it. By normalizing consumer credit and mail-order homeownership, it helped define what middle class looked like. A house, appliances, furniture, all acquired through a steady rhythm of payments. Money flowed from pay envelope to Sears account to railcar and back again. Daily life, family rituals, even arguments about bills ran through the company's ledgers. That is where the power really sat. Sears became an infrastructure layer, like an invisible utility for dreams, embedded in homes, neighborhoods, and financial routines. It knew what people bought, how they lived, how reliably they paid. At times inspiring and at times chilling, it's an example of what happens when one retailer becomes the operating system for everyday life. But that comfort with credit carried a hidden twist. Once Sears mastered financing washing machines and houses, its leaders began to wonder what else they could finance. Banking, insurance, real estate, even Wall Street itself started to look more attractive than crowded sales floors. And while the old empire looked up at skyscrapers and balance sheets, a different merchant was quietly perfecting concrete boxes, highways, and data, ready to pull the crown away. While that new merchant was wiring up highways and data, Sears was already living through an earlier revolution it actually understood. There was a time when America itself was moving, leaving the farm, crowding into cities, trading horse-drawn wagons for Fords and Buicks. The country that once waited by the mailbox now wanted to stroll down Main Street, to see, touch, and argue over prices in person. Urbanization hit like a tide. In 1900, most Americans still lived in rural areas. By the 1920s, city skylines were rising, streetcars were humming, and weekend going downtown became a small ritual of power for the new wage-earning family. The car turned distance into an inconvenience rather than a prison. Shoppers still loved the comfort of the Sears catalog, but they wanted something more: the thrill of walking through aisles instead of flipping through pages. Sears saw the danger in staying trapped in mailboxes, so it did something bold. Let me take you back to Chicago, 1925. After decades of ruling from paper, Sears opened its first permanent retail store right in its hometown, dragging the catalog into the city and giving it 4 walls, glass windows, and a front door. Not just a counter and a few shelves, but a sprawling temple to middle-class money, where the catalog's promises suddenly stood life-size under electric lights. From there, the invasion spread. Detroit, Philadelphia, Boston, Dallas. One by one, big cities woke up to find the Sears catalog had stepped off the page and onto their main commercial streets. Shoppers could walk past rows of tools, appliances, and dresses that once existed only as tiny black and white drawings. It was the same empire of goods, but now it smelled like perfume counters and rubber tires instead of printer's ink. The strategy was quietly ruthless. Sears used the trust it had earned in lonely farmhouses to pull crowds through its new doors. The catalog wasn't replaced, it was weaponized. Customers ordered from home, picked up in store, returned broken merchandise to a nearby counter instead of a distant post office. Each building doubled as a local warehouse, a service center, a billboard, and a cash register, all feeding the same machine. Long before anyone whispered the word omni-channel, Sears had already built the multi-channel life of the American shopper. Mail plus brick and mortar, paper plus pavement, long-distance reach fused with local presence. It is an example of what happens when a company really understands how people live, not just how they buy. At times inspiring and at times chilling, the system turned the act of shopping into an ecosystem that felt inescapable. Then the Second World War ended, the GI Bill poured fuel on home ownership, and the American dream packed its bags and left downtown. The next great frontier wasn't the city at all, but an endless ring of driveways, ranch houses, and parking lots. Sears was perfectly positioned to follow it into the suburbs, and that success would finally make it feel untouchable. That's where the trouble begins. There was a time when the center of American life wasn't a screen or an app, but a driveway leading to a ranch house, a two-tone Chevy in the carport, and a Sears catalog on the kitchen table. The empire of downtown skyscrapers had given way to an empire of cul-de-sacs, and Sears rode that wave like it had been built just for them. Let me take you back to the 1950s and 60s. Millions of returning GIs were using the GI Bill to buy homes, go to college, and step out of the poverty their parents had known. The federal government was pouring concrete into the interstate highway system, carving asphalt veins from city cores to brand new subdivisions. Behind every fresh lawn and white picket fence, a young family was trying to fill an empty house with beds, refrigerators, lawnmowers, and school clothes. That hunger for objects, for comfort, for visible proof of rising wealth, needed a supplier. Sears stepped into that role with ruthless efficiency. Not only was it the largest retailer on earth, by the 1960s it accounted for about 1% of the entire U.S. economy, an almost absurd share of the nation's money flowing through one company. Sears didn't just sell products, it installed itself in the physical and emotional blueprint of suburbia, anchoring the new shopping centers that rose next to highway exits, turning parking lots into pilgrimage sites for the middle class. Walk through a typical mall, and Sears was the gravitational center. Craftsman Tools promised a competent father in the garage. Kenmore Appliances promised a modern kitchen humming with progress. Toughskins jeans and Sunday dresses promised kids who looked ready for school and church. The store floor was a map of suburban life, each department a different room in the dream house these families were building. And behind that store, the catalog still ruled. Thick, dog-eared, and living on the coffee table, it was the default interface for middle-class ambition. Couples circled wedding registry items. Parents handed it to children before Christmas and watched them create careful, handwritten wish lists. Every August, back to school meant flipping to the clothing pages, measuring feet against printed shoe outlines, and turning mail order into a family ritual. For millions, if it wasn't in Sears, it almost didn't exist. Because Sears was everywhere, it felt eternal. It financed homes and appliances, insured cars and lives, outfitted garages and closets, and quietly taught Americans how to live as consumers. It's an example of what happens when a company becomes so woven into daily life that questioning it feels like questioning gravity. His story is one of dominance that felt at times inspiring and at times chilling. A reminder that power can make a firm stop looking over its shoulder. However, while suburbia crowned Sears as king, something else was happening far from those polished malls. A different kind of retailer was watching, taking notes, and planning to attack the empire from the edges. There was a time when Sears didn't just dominate the mall, it tried to dominate the skyline. In 1973, in the heart of Chicago, the company opened a headquarters so tall it bent the horizon, the Sears Tower. For a moment, it was the tallest building on Earth, a black steel monument to one retailer's belief that its life would keep rising forever. The tower wasn't just an office, it was a signal. Not only did Sears control America's mailboxes and suburbs, now it claimed the clouds, projecting money, power, and permanence. From that height, the empire looked untouchable. Yet that same skyscraper also revealed something subtle and dangerous. Sears had started to think less like a merchant and more like a bank and a landlord. Let me take you back to an earlier pivot. Long before the tower, Sears had already stepped beyond retail by creating Allstate in the 1930s, selling insurance to the same families who bought their tires and toasters. After World War II, those white-collar profits looked clean, predictable, almost glamorous compared to hauling crates and haggling with suppliers. It felt natural to keep going. By the 1980s, Sears wasn't just a store, it was trying to become a financial supermarket. It bought Dean Witter Reynolds, a Wall Street brokerage, and folded in Coldwell Banker, a giant in real estate. Then came Discover, a new credit card designed to live in the same wallet as Sears charge cards, capturing fees, interest, and data from everyday life. One company now sold you a washing machine, insured your car, brokered your stocks, and processed your restaurant bill. On paper, it looked brilliant. Higher margins, more fee income, less dependence on the grind of selling shirts and power tools. Executives talked about synergies, cross-selling, and financial services platforms. They had moved from measuring turns on a shelf to modeling yields on a portfolio. It's an example of what happens when a retailer convinces itself the real game is upstairs, not out on the floor. Capital followed the language. Leadership poured attention into new products at Dean Witter, growth targets at Allstate, national advertising for Discover. The tower's upper floors buzzed with lawyers, analysts, and MBAs, while out in the store's carpets wore thin, layouts grew stale, and the logistics network aged. The company that once obsessed over catalogs and delivery times now obsessed over basis points and market share in credit. Then comes the uncomfortable question. When your headquarters scrapes the sky and your senior team speaks fluent financial jargon, who is left to fight over shelf space, truck routes, and angry customers? Somewhere between the 100th floor and the loading dock, the soul of the merchant started to drift. And while Sears gazed upward, another drama was unfolding far below the skyline, in places the tower could barely see. Small towns, cheap land, and a different retailer quietly perfecting a far more ruthless kind of discipline. Down where the highways narrow to 2 lanes and the tallest building is a grain elevator, another kind of empire was taking shape. There was a time when Chicago skyscrapers and glossy catalogs looked like the future of American money and power. But in 1950s, Arkansas, the future was driving a pickup and unlocking a tiny variety store before sunrise. Let me take you back to Bentonville. A dusty county seat, a courthouse square, a Ben Franklin 5 and dime with creaky floors and cheap fluorescent lights. Behind the counter, a balding young manager named Sam Walton is not dreaming about a tower. He is counting pennies, rearranging end caps, and asking every customer what brought them in. His story is one of almost obsessive attention to the smallest details, because for Sam, every nickel left on the table is a betrayal of the people he lives beside. Where Sears executives talked about segments and markets, Sam talked about neighbors. He knew their names, their kids, their paydays. He cut prices until the margins hurt, then tried to make it back on volume, on faster turnover, on moving goods so quickly they barely had time to gather dust. Low prices were not a weekend promotion. They were a kind of religion. Everyday low prices, every aisle, every town. If that meant driving an old truck and living in a modest house while the register screamed all day, he was fine with the trade. And while the tower held meetings, Sam held a steering wheel. He would disappear for hours, bouncing along back roads to check out any store rumored to be doing well. He walked their aisles slowly, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, counting how many feet were given to detergent versus dog food, asking clerks which items actually flew off the shelves. Then he drove home and copied what worked, undercut what didn't, and kept pushing his team to move faster, cheaper, smarter. It's an example of what happens when competitive paranoia replaces corporate pride. His core belief was simple and ruthless. Big chains ignored small towns. They chased malls, interstates, and upper-middle-class zip codes. That left hundreds of communities where families still needed socks, tools, toys, and groceries, but had to drive an hour and pay city prices for city selection. Sam decided that if he could bring city-level variety into those forgotten places, then sell it at rock-bottom prices, he would not just win customers, he would own the entire local economy. In 1962, that belief finally got a name. Sam opened the first Walmart in Rogers, Arkansas, a bare-bones, big-box experiment aimed straight at the rural heartland. That same year, Sears proudly cut the ribbon on its first suburban mall department store, convinced it was marching into the future. 2 openings, 2 visions, 1 quiet fork in the road. What happened next would show which religion of retail would conquer America, and which giant had just started digging its own grave. There was a time when 1962 looked like a shared victory lap, not a split in the timeline. 2 grand openings, 2 sets of smiling executives, 1 country in love with cars, suburbs, and shopping. On the surface, Sears and Walmart were just adding more places to buy socks and lawnmowers. Underneath, they were choosing opposite religions of retail. Let me take you back to that moment. Sears unveiled its first modern, mall-based department store, a glossy cathedral for the rising middle class, air conditioning, escalators, bright displays, a credit desk ready to sign families up for more buying power. The location choice said everything. Anchored in growing metro suburbs, attached to a mall that promised fashion, food, and endless parking. To Sears, the future of wealth was clear. follow the suburbs, build bigger temples. Down in Rogers, Arkansas, Sam Walton did something that looked almost backward. He opened a no-frills discount box on the edge of a small town that big city chains ignored. No marble floors, no chandeliers, just low ceilings, concrete, fluorescent lights, and prices shaved to the bone. While Sears chased the aspirational life of the new suburban homeowner, Walmart went after the paycheck-to-paycheck family in rural America, the people used to driving an hour just to find a decent deal. The contrast in how they defined growth was just as sharp. Sears believed power came from more categories under one roof, more square footage, more financial products from its credit cards and insurance arms, appliances, tools, dresses, mortgages, even life insurance. The company wanted to be the one-stop empire for everything money touched. Walmart believed power came from less cost in the supply chain, less waste in the back room, less time between the truck and the shelf. Both were building on infrastructure, but not the same kind. Sears stacked its future on malls, catalogs, and credit systems that extended its reach into nearly every American home. It built towers of glass and steel, including the Sears Tower, as monuments to that confidence. Walmart quietly built on highways, trucks, and data. Distribution centers placed with surgical precision. Private fleets timed to the hour. Early computerized inventory that watched what left the shelf and told suppliers in near real time. One of those infrastructures would age well, the other would crack. As the decades rolled on, the glossy mall that once felt like the beating heart of American life would start to empty out, while the plain concrete box by the highway multiplied. The thick Sears catalog that had trained generations how to shop would be eclipsed by invisible data flows and barcodes whispering sales numbers into servers. From 1962 forward, the transfer of power was slow, almost polite at first. But every year, a little more money drifted from escalators and display windows to pallets and loading docks. It is an example of what happens when two companies live through the same moment, see the same country, and finally bet everything on opposite definitions of the future. There was a time when every serious retailer dreamed about the big city mall, the glittering suburb, the affluent family pushing a cart under soft lighting. Sam Walton went the other way. He drove past the malls, past the suburbs, and kept driving until the billboards disappeared and the town population signs dropped under 10,000. Let me take you back to that early Walmart playbook. While Sears opened polished anchors in new shopping centers, Walton was cutting ribbons in places that barely had a stoplight. Harrison, Arkansas, Claremore, Oklahoma. Towns where the Friday night event was a high school football game and the biggest competitor was a tired Main Street hardware store. To Sears, those markets were rounding errors. To Walmart, they were the entire opportunity. Because the big chains stayed away, each new Walmart arrived like an invading empire with no opposing army. One store, one town, one near monopoly. When the only real general merchandise outlet for 30 miles has a blue sign and sprawling parking lot, every paycheck in town flows through its registers. That concentrated volume became a weapon. Walmart could walk into supplier meetings and promise something Sears rarely bothered to collect from the countryside. Guaranteed, predictable sales from hundreds of captive communities. This is where the power shifted from pretty displays to raw logistics. With those rural volumes locked in, Walmart squeezed manufacturers for lower prices, longer payment terms, better packaging, cheaper detergent, cheaper jeans, cheaper cereal. The savings cycled back into what Walton called everyday low prices, which pulled in even more of the town's money, which created even more leverage. It's an example of what happens when dominance in small places quietly adds up to national scale. But the real advantage wasn't only financial, it was psychological. In these towns, Walmart wasn't just a store. It was where you bought groceries, school clothes, motor oil, a shotgun, and a birthday cake. It was where the local charity set up tables, where people met neighbors in the aisles, where teenagers lingered because there was nowhere else to go. Habit turned into loyalty. Loyalty turned into reflex. Need anything? You go to Walmart. Why even think about Sears? Over time, this rural web thickened into a dense, defensive shield. Competitors who tried to invade those markets discovered the cruel math. To match Walmart's prices and hours in a town of 7,000 people meant bleeding money. To ignore the town meant leaving Walmart with uncontested revenue and data. While Sears fine-tuned seasonal window displays, Walmart was learning how to run lean operations on razor-thin margins, training managers to shave costs in places where every dollar mattered. The irony is almost too neat. Sears, the former mail-order king that once reached into every farmhouse mailbox, trained itself not to see the very towns that had built its first fortune. Walmart saw them, owned them, and finally used them as a launchpad. From that quiet rural empire, the next phase of the story would move outward, onto the interstates, and into the suburbs Sears thought it had secured forever. There was a time when retail power was measured in marble floors and skyscrapers. Sears had both. Walmart, out in the fields of Arkansas, had something less glamorous and far more lethal: trucks, data, and an obsession with moving boxes faster than anyone else alive. Let me take you back to the quiet revolution happening behind Walmart's fluorescent lights. In a typical Sears world, goods crawled from factory to regional warehouse, then sat in the back of a store waiting for a customer who might never come. Walmart tore that rhythm apart. At its massive regional distribution centers, 18-wheelers roared in, unloaded pallets, and within hours, those same pallets were sliding onto outbound trailers. Cross-docking meant the warehouse was less a storage room and more a relay race. That single idea changed the economics of retail. When inventory doesn't linger, it doesn't eat money. Walmart's centers turned inventory 2 to 3 times faster than traditional department stores like Sears. Faster turns meant less capital frozen in unsold goods, fewer dusty boxes that had to be marked down, and a supply line that pulsed in time with real demand rather than last season's guesses. Because the system was lean, the company could live its mantra of everyday low prices without watching its margins bleed out on the balance sheet. Meanwhile, Sears still trusted the old empire it had built. Big stores, big back rooms, big seasonal orders placed months in advance, then parked on shelves in the hope that the American middle-class family would keep buying the same way forever. When demand shifted, those shelves didn't move. Prices did. Downward. Clearance racks became the quiet confession that the logistics machine behind the glossy catalog was slow, heavy, and expensive. Here the contrast turns at times inspiring and at times chilling. Walmart poured money into distribution centers, private truck fleets, and eventually a satellite network tying stores to headquarters in near real time. Data from the register whispered what was selling, and trucks adjusted. Sears, even with its wealth and prestige, moved through the calendar like a battleship turning in a bathtub. Because of that inertia, it paid in margin, in wasted labor, in aisles cluttered with things people no longer wanted. Then comes the pattern interrupt. This wasn't operations. For Walmart, logistics was the battlefield. The war with Sears wasn't really fought in Sunday circulars or holiday promotions. It was fought in how quickly a box of detergent could go from a factory door to a rural checkout lane. It's an example of what happens when one company treats the backroom as an afterthought and another treats it as the source of all power. By the time Sears noticed, the cost gap was baked in. Walmart could sell cheaper, replenish faster, and still make more money per item. From that hidden engine of cross-docks and highways, the next phase of the story would move from beating Sears on cost to quietly rewriting what American shopping looked like at all. From that hidden engine, the real divide wasn't just concrete and conveyor belts. It was culture. Two empires, two headquarters, two completely different ideas of what power looked like. There was a time when the center of American retail life sat high above Chicago, in the Sears Tower, the tallest building in the world. Up there, in paneled conference rooms, decisions moved through layers of vice presidents, assistant vice presidents, and committees whose meetings spawned more meetings. Long memos circulated, reports were bound, forecasts were debated. Weeks could pass between a problem appearing on a store floor and a decision finally drifting back down from the clouds. On paper, it looked professional, disciplined, modern corporate America at its peak. In practice, it meant distance. Executives who once walked aisles now lived in spreadsheets. Store managers became message carriers, not decision makers. A customer could complain about an empty shelf in Ohio, and by the time Chicago approved a fix, the season had changed. It's an example of what happens when a company that once moved with entrepreneurial speed slowly teaches itself to love planning more than execution. Meanwhile, in Bentonville, Arkansas, the command center of Walmart looked almost plain. No skyscraper, no marble lobby. Just a low building where, every Saturday morning, managers crammed into a room for rapid-fire meetings. Numbers were read, problems were called out by name, wins were celebrated. Then came something that would have looked absurd in Chicago: the Walmart cheer, grown adults spelling out WALMART like a high school pep rally, a ritual that welded cost-cutting to a sense of almost religious mission. Sam Walton didn't watch his empire from a penthouse. He drove a pickup truck, flew his little plane, and dropped into stores unannounced, wandering aisles, talking to clerks, grilling managers. Store managers weren't memo couriers. They were field generals. Because of that, responsibility flowed downward, not up. Bentonville pumped out real-time sales data and pricing guidance, then trusted local leaders to act. If a town in Texas loved fishing gear and hated formal wear, that store could expand tackle, shrink suits, tweak prices by the day. Sears moved the opposite way. Decisions that once lived with local managers were pulled into national committees. Assortments were standardized. Pricing was set centrally. A manager in Phoenix who saw a rival undercutting lawnmowers could write a memo, attend a call, wait for approval. Walmart's manager across the street could walk the competitor's aisle at 9 a.m. and have new prices on the floor by noon. His story is one of rituals too. At Walmart, cost-cutting wasn't a slide in a deck. It was Sam flying coach, sharing motel rooms, hammering home that every wasted dollar was stolen from the customer. At Sears, the rituals were budget cycles, strategic offsites, polished presentations, respectable, impressive, and at times inspiring and at times chilling when set against what was coming. So in a world where speed and adaptation decide survival, which culture is better built to see a threat in time, and which one only realizes the danger when it's already standing in the lobby? There was a time when the most valuable asset in American retail wasn't a skyscraper, a mall, or a catalog. It was a stream of invisible numbers racing through the sky, telling one company exactly what America was buying, minute by minute. That company wasn't Sears. Let me take you back to the 1980s and 90s, when Walmart quietly built one of the largest private satellite networks on Earth. While Sears admired the view from the Sears Tower, Walmart was launching dishes on top of thousands of low, unglamorous boxes in small towns. Each dish turned a boring discount store into a live terminal, beaming sales, inventory, and pricing data back to Bentonville in near real time. Not end of month, not end of week. Today, at the register, another revolution was happening. Walmart rolled out barcode scanners and point-of-sale systems with a missionary zeal, wiring even rural stores into a single nervous system. Every can of soup, every pair of socks, every late-night impulse buy in a town of 5,000 people became a data point. Those blips flowed straight into central databases, feeding forecasting models, flagging anomalies, and telling logistics exactly what needed to move, from which warehouse, onto which truck, by when. It wasn't glamorous, but it was power. Because of that information flow, Walmart could cut prices, trim inventory, and still keep shelves full. Trucks didn't wander, they executed. Promotions weren't guesses, they were targeted responses to what the numbers were screaming. It's an example of what happens when a company treats information like money and time like an enemy. Then came Retail Link, the move that turned this data empire inside out. Instead of hoarding the numbers, Walmart gave suppliers direct access. A Procter & Gamble manager in Cincinnati could sit at a screen, watch real-time sales of Tide in Oklahoma, and adjust shipments without waiting for a buyer's call. Suppliers managed their own inventory, tuned promotions, and saw the same truth Walmart saw. The line between company and vendor blurred into a single, shared dashboard. Sears had computers. It had IT departments, budgets, consultants, all the respectable machinery of a big corporation, but it treated technology as a cost center, not the core of the business. Systems were implemented slowly, differently in different divisions, often with gaps between catalog, stores, and credit operations. Reports came in days or weeks later, filtered through layers of managers and meetings. By the time a problem appeared on paper, Walmart had already reacted to it in the real world. His story is one of real estate, prestige, and a belief that owning the land meant owning the future. Walmart's story is one of satellites, scanners, and a belief that whoever saw reality first would own the customer. Sears thought it was in the business of selling goods. Walmart understood it was in the business of moving information faster than anyone else, and that quiet shift in definition would finally decide who kept the crown. There was a time when Sears didn't just sell to the American middle class. It owned the entire ecosystem around their spending. Not only did it run the biggest retail empire in the country, it also sold those same families insurance, managed their investments, issued their credit cards, and collected rent from the skyline itself. Let me take you back to the 1970s and 80s. Sears had Allstate, one of the largest auto insurers in the nation. It had Dean Witter, a Wall Street brokerage handling the savings and ambitions of millions. It launched the Discover Card, a bold challenger in the booming world of plastic money. And watching over all of it was the Sears Tower in Chicago, the tallest building on Earth, a monument of steel and glass, quietly throwing off real estate income while signaling that this was no longer just a store. This was a financial fortress. Inside the boardroom, the logic felt irresistible. Retail was hard. It meant inventory headaches, cranky customers, and the grind of running thousands of aging stores. Financial services, by contrast, promised higher margins, faster growth, and a sheen of Wall Street glamour. Why wrestle with leaky roofs and outdated escalators when the brokerage unit was minting fees, the insurer was compounding float, and the credit arm was raking in interest at scale? So money followed the excitement. Capital that once would have gone into modernizing store formats, upgrading supply chains, or building the kind of data systems Walmart obsessed over, instead flowed into expanding Allstate, growing Dean Witter, and pushing Discover into more wallets. Executive attention followed the same path. The rising stars at Sears wanted to be in finance, not in the unfashionable trenches of merchandising and logistics. Meanwhile, out on the sales floor, the decay was slow but relentless. Fixtures aged, service slipped, assortments felt stale. Competitors rolled out bright big-box concepts, sharper pricing, and cleaner layouts, while Sears clung to a department store model that felt older every year. It's an example of what happens when the life of the balance sheet looks healthier than the life of the actual customer. Here's the twist. For a while, the numbers looked great. Allstate threw off steady profits. Dean Witter rode the bull markets. Discover carved out a real niche. On paper, the empire seemed diversified, resilient, even visionary. The strong performance of these financial arms masked the slow erosion of the retail core that had built the name Sears into a symbol of American wealth and aspiration. But diversification has a dark side when focus disappears. As pure-play financial giants scaled up and pure-play retailers like Walmart and Target modernized with ruthless discipline, Sears found itself in a no-man's land, outcompeted on both fronts. And when the winds shifted, there would be no safe harbor left, only a reckoning that would finally force Sears to decide what business it was in at all. Diversification had blurred the mission. But in the late 1980s, the scoreboard still looked reassuring. Sears, Kmart, and Walmart were posting eerily similar sales figures, each hovering in the same revenue neighborhood, each claiming to be the future of American retail. On paper, it looked like a fair fight, a three-way race for the crown. In boardrooms and business magazines, the story was stability, scale, and safety. There was a time when Sears appeared untouchable. It was the established giant, the company that had helped build the middle class, the name on the tallest building in the world. Sears Tower didn't just scrape the sky, it symbolized money, power, and permanence. The company was diversified into credit, insurance, real estate, and financial services, sitting on a vast empire of malls and suburban anchors. To many executives, that mix looked sophisticated, even elegant. Why fear a regional chain from Arkansas when Sears had already conquered America's mailboxes and shopping centers? Kmart played a different role. It was the discount king, the place where working families hunted for bargains under fluorescent lights and blue light specials. Its life was built on volume and low prices, a kind of mass-market theater of thrift. Analysts framed the landscape cleanly. Sears for the aspiring middle class, Kmart for the budget-conscious, Walmart as a scrappy upstart. The idea that this upstart might rewrite the entire script felt, at best, premature. Yet let me take you back to those same years and change the camera angle. While Sears executives admired their skyline and Kmart chased promotions, Walmart was quietly doing something more ruthless, compounding structural advantages. It focused on rural towns the big players ignored, locked in local loyalty, and drilled a simple mantra into its culture: everyday low prices, no games. Behind that slogan sat a growing network of distribution centers, cross-docking warehouses, and an obsession with squeezing every inefficiency out of the supply chain. The warning signs were already flashing. Walmart's sales were rising faster, its same-store numbers stronger, its footprint spreading from the South into the Midwest and beyond. It invested in data systems, inventory tracking, and logistics long before those sounded glamorous. Where Sears saw stores as real estate boxes and Kmart saw aisles for promotions, Walmart saw a living information network, pulsing with demand signals and cost data. The others were selling goods. Walmart was quietly mastering movement. Because of that discipline, the growth curves began to bend. Similar sales in 1989 hid very different trajectories. Walmart's revenue line was steepening, while Sears and Kmart were already flattening under their own weight. Many experts still believed brand and size would protect Sears, that history and prestige would somehow override math. It's an example of what happens when comfort blinds leadership to compounding change. On the surface, it still looked like three rivals circling the same prize. But beneath the surface, only one of them was building a machine designed to win before the others even knew the real game had started. On price, it never really was a fair fight. Walmart brought a single sharp blade to the battle, while Sears and Kmart showed up dragging a whole toolbox of coupons, circulars, and weekend doorbusters that quietly drained their strength. Let me take you back to the core of Walmart's weapon: everyday low price. Not low this Sunday, not low with this coupon, but a promise that the price on the shelf today would be the price tomorrow, and that it would already be cut to the bone. That confidence didn't come from marketing slogans. It came from structural cost savings, cheaper distribution, tighter labor scheduling, relentless vendor pressure. Walmart lowered its own cost of doing business, then locked those savings into permanent price cuts instead of flashy promotions. There was a time when Sears and Kmart thought the opposite was smarter. They trained customers to chase the ad, not the aisle. Sunday newspapers, thick with circulars, rotating super sales, double coupon days, private label credit card discounts layered on top. On paper, it looked like clever psychology. In practice, it told millions of shoppers, never pay full price here, just wait. The empire of promotions made the stores feel exciting for a weekend, then strangely empty on a Tuesday. EDLP did something deceptively powerful. It simplified everything behind the scenes. Buyers at Walmart could plan inventory without guessing which artificial spike a coupon would create. Trucks could be loaded for steady flow, not boom and bust traffic. Advertising could shift from screaming about this week's sale to quietly reinforcing a single idea. This is the cheapest place in town, every day. Over time, that consistency built a kind of trust. Customers believed Walmart wasn't playing money games with them. Sears, by contrast, needed more forecasting, more markdowns, more managerial bandwidth just to survive its own promotions. Every sale created a hangover of unsold sizes, odd colors, and aging inventory that had to be marked down again. Managers spent their life retagging racks, reprinting signs, and trying to guess which coupon combo would blow up the budget. With weaker data systems than Walmart, the chaos didn't just hurt margins, it blinded leadership. They were busy managing noise while Walmart was measuring signal. Then comes the pattern most viewers miss. Pricing wasn't just a tactic, it was culture in numeric form. Walmart's EDLP demanded discipline. Hold the line, keep costs down, no last-minute marketing heroics to make the quarter. Sears drifted into the opposite habit. When sales softened, launch another promotion. When that failed, add another layer of complexity. It's an example of what happens when a company lets short-term marketing drive long-term operations. Because of that, the gap between the two wasn't only about who charged less. It was about who could think clearly. And as the next phase of the story shows, the company with the simpler pricing system was also the one ready for a far more brutal revolution. The rise of real-time data and the logistics superweapon that came with it. Out in the aisles, the truth was harder to ignore than any spreadsheet. There was a time when a Saturday trip to Sears felt like entering the official showroom of the American middle class, yet by the 1980s and 1990s, that showroom was starting to look tired around the edges. Let me take you back to a typical Sears visit. The building is huge, anchored to a mall like a concrete throne. You walk in and land in a maze of departments that feel like separate little fiefdoms. Appliances over here, tools over there, apparel somewhere past the perfume counter. Each zone guarded by its own commission-based salesperson, hovering just close enough to remind you that every question is a potential paycheck. The refrigerators gleam. The Craftsman tools promise lifetime strength. The Kenmore washer is pitched like a long-term relationship, but the carpet is worn and the lighting is yellowed, giving everything a slightly dated, end-of-season feel. Because Sears had grown up on big-ticket glory, the rhythm of life inside the store matched that mentality. You went there to buy a washing machine, a lawnmower, a set of tires, maybe a new suit when a promotion finally came through. It was an empire of milestones and upgrades, not milk and bread emergencies. Families might only walk through those doors a few times a year, but when they did, they were expected to spend real money and sit through real sales pitches. Now shift scenes to a Walmart in the same era. The parking lot is busy on a Tuesday night, not just on holidays. Inside, the lighting is bright, almost harsh. The aisles are wide, the shelves low enough to see across the entire floor. No one is waiting to help close a deal. The message is simpler and far more ruthless. Grab what you need, it will be cheap. Groceries, diapers, motor oil, socks, school supplies, detergent. Everyday essentials piled high, priced low, replenished constantly. Because Walmart organized its whole life around those basics, trips there became a habit, not an event. A family might swing through 3 times a week, picking up cereal, then trash bags, then a birthday gift on the way to a soccer game. Over time, those small, frequent visits built a different kind of power, familiarity. Kids grew up knowing exactly where the toy aisle was, not where the Sears appliance desk sat next to layaway. Quietly, the center of gravity shifted. Younger families defaulted to Walmart for routine shopping. Then, when they finally needed a TV or a microwave, they were already in the habit of trusting the place that handled their groceries. Sears still imagined itself as the destination for serious purchases, but the next generation was building its financial life somewhere else. It's an example of what happens when the ground truth in the aisles drifts away from the story in the boardroom. Shoppers were voting with carts and minivans, trip after trip. So when those two realities collide, the myth of the premium department store versus the fluorescent-lit world of everyday low prices, which one do you think wins in the end? There was a time when the future of American shopping seemed to live under one roof, in one gigantic box, parked next to an ocean of asphalt. Not marble floors, not chandeliers, concrete, fluorescent lights, pallets and price tags that hit like a hammer. The big box idea was simple and brutal. Take a huge footprint, strip out the frills, jam in an enormous assortment of goods, and run the whole thing with a kind of ruthless efficiency that turned every square foot into a cash machine. Fewer salespeople, more shelving, less display art, more inventory. It wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful. Because once a family could get clothes, toys, auto supplies, and a week's worth of groceries in a single trip, every extra stop started to feel like a tax on their time. Let me take you back to the 1980s and 1990s, when Walmart saw this clearly and hit the accelerator. The supercenter was the weapon. General merchandise fused with a full supermarket under one massive roof. You didn't just buy a TV there. You bought cereal, diapers, motor oil, school supplies, and a birthday cake, often in the same cart, often every week. By rolling out thousands of these supercenters across the country, especially in smaller towns, Walmart locked in a rhythm of life. Payday, paycheck, parking lot, cart, repeat. Sears watched this happen from inside the mall. It still looked like a classic department store, with separate floors, distinct departments, and a layout designed for browsing, not blitzkrieg shopping. It clung to its identity as the anchor, the destination at the far end of a corridor lined with smaller shops, at a time when the real traffic was migrating to standalone boxes near the highway. The company had the money, the brand, the heritage. What it didn't have was the will to blow up its own format. Yes, Sears experimented. Off-mall stores, specialty concepts, smaller format outlets that tried to chase appliance buyers or hardware shoppers. But there was no single, decisive pivot, no clear supercenter-style bet that said, "This is the new empire." No nationwide wave of Sears-branded big boxes where a family could buy groceries, socks, and a lawnmower in one ruthless sweep. While Walmart was standardizing the supercenter like a military template, Sears was tinkering around the edges. The strategic consequence was quiet at first, then devastating. Walmart became the place you had to visit every week, the routine built into the family calendar. Sears became the place you might visit once or twice a year, when a fridge died or a washing machine finally gave up. Trip frequency is power. Weekly trips mean constant data, constant cash flow, constant relevance. Annual trips mean memories, and when a company trades weekly habits for fading memories, it opens the door to a new kind of predator, one that doesn't even need a parking lot to steal the crown. That new predator didn't just watch shoppers, it measured them. Every cart, every barcode, every Tuesday afternoon impulse buy turned into a line in a database. Walmart wasn't just running stores, it was quietly wiring up one of the most powerful information networks in retail history. There was a time when merchants walked aisles with clipboards and a good feel for the business. Walmart replaced the clipboard with real-time sales feeds. If a $9.96 toaster started flying off shelves in Tulsa by noon, Bentonville could see it by evening. Orders were adjusted, trucks were rerouted, and that toaster was back on the shelf before most competitors even realized there had been a spike in demand. Slow movers didn't linger. They were cut, cleared, or replaced with something that actually earned their keep. Inside this empire of fluorescent lights and concrete floors, category managers became data-armed generals. Their life was a constant loop of scan data, margin reports, and tiny experiments. Move the cereal one shelf higher. Watch the numbers. Run a weekend rollback on laundry detergent. Watch the numbers. Give an end cap to a new brand. Watch the numbers. The story of each product was told in real time, and the verdict was ruthless. Perform or disappear. And Walmart didn't keep that power to itself. Through its retail link system, suppliers could log in and see exactly how their items were selling by store, by day, sometimes by hour. Let me take you back to the 1990s. While many chains were still mailing spreadsheets, Procter & Gamble could sit in Cincinnati, stare at Walmart's live inventory, and adjust production runs, promotions, and packaging almost on the fly. Shelf space stopped being a political favor and became a data-backed negotiation. Now cross the parking lot in your mind to Sears. Buyers there still had authority, but their world moved slower. They leaned on historical reports from last season, long-standing vendor relationships, and quarterly meetings. A jacket that always sold well might get another year on the rack, even if the numbers were quietly turning against it. Feedback loops stretched from weeks to months. By the time a bad bet was obvious, the warehouse was already full. His story is one of information turning into power, and at times inspiring, and at times chilling. Walmart's shelves increasingly mirrored what customers actually wanted on that day, in that town, at that price. Sears' shelves reflected what its merchants believed customers should want, based on what had worked before. It's an example of what happens when a data-driven organism competes with a memory-driven one. Here's the part that rarely showed up in glossy annual reports. Every week that Walmart cut a loser faster, reordered a winner sooner, or priced a staple a few cents lower, it widened the gap. Not with a single dramatic move, but with thousands of tiny compounding advantages. By the time quarterly numbers came out, the real transfer of wealth had already happened, one scanned barcode at a time. And while Sears was still arguing over floor sets and seasonal resets, Walmart was about to aim that same data weapon at an even bigger target: the entire supply chain behind the store. That supply chain was about to meet its final exam. Not another barcode, not another forklift, but a glowing screen on a kitchen table. Because when the internet arrived, the real question became brutal and simple. Who would own shopping when the store lived inside the home computer? There was a time when Sears already owned that idea. Let me take you back to the age of the Sears catalog, a phone book-sized promise of American wealth dropped into tens of millions of mailboxes. Families flipped through those onion skin pages, circled dreams in red pen, sent money to a distant address, and waited. No showroom. No touching the product. Just trust, patience, and a delivery that appeared weeks later on the porch. Sears trained a continent to buy sight unseen. That habit was the foundation of its empire. In an era of rural poverty and isolated towns, the catalog was the internet on paper. Want a dress, a shotgun, a house kit, even a tombstone? Sears would ship it. The company rewired American life around remote shopping long before anyone typed a password. Then the 1990s hit. Dial-up tones, clunky browsers, and a new generation of founders who saw the web as a giant, borderless catalog. Jeff Bezos openly described Amazon as a catalog on a screen, with infinite pages and no printing costs. Early e-commerce players studied the old mail order playbook, stripped out the paper, and kept the logic. Centralized warehouses, standardized products, and customers willing to wait a few days for the right price. If this story followed common sense, Sears would have marched straight into that future. It had the brand, the logistics, the experience with remote credit and returns. Instead, it treated the internet like a side hustle. Sears.com existed, but inside the company it was a small project fighting for budget against carpet replacements and mall remodels. The aging paper catalog limped along. The website never became the beating heart, and leadership acted as if e-commerce was an optional add-on rather than the next version of its own DNA. Meanwhile, Walmart, which had been late even to barcodes, stumbled online at first. The early Walmart.com looked clumsy next to Amazon, the assortment thin, the experience awkward. But the mindset was different. Over time, Walmart poured real money into digital, wired its private satellite and data systems into online inventory, experimented with site-to-store pickup, and began turning thousands of physical boxes into one integrated, digital-aware machine. Not elegant, but serious. The irony is at times inspiring and at times chilling. The company that invented remote shopping, that should have dominated online retail by right of history, finally handed the crown to digital natives and to its brick-and-mortar rival. It's an example of what happens when a giant confuses the form of its power with the source of it. The next revolution was already humming through phone lines, and Sears, of all companies, fell asleep while its own idea was reborn without it. There was a time when owning the mall meant owning the customer. In the late 20th century, Sears didn't just rent space in America's new suburban temples of consumption. It sat at the head of the table. Developers needed a big, respectable name to anchor their projects, to convince banks and city councils that the concrete and glass would fill with life. Sears stepped in as that anchor again and again, cutting deals that went far beyond simple leases. It bought parcels, took long-term control of key corners, negotiated low rents in exchange for drawing traffic. In many centers, the mall was the shell. Sears was the asset. On paper, that meant money, power, and a balance sheet swollen with prime locations. For decades, this looked brilliant. The American middle class was moving to the suburbs, gas was cheap, and the mall became the default weekend ritual for millions of families. Sears, with its tools, appliances, and clothing under one roof, sat right where the parking lots emptied out and the strollers rolled in. That real estate position gave it bargaining power with landlords, leverage with brands, and a sense of permanence that rivals envied. While Walmart was still figuring out how to dominate small towns, Sears already owned the front door of suburbia. But let me take you back to when the shine on those malls quietly began to fade. Demographics shifted. Crime fears rose in certain regions. Two-income households had less time to wander air-conditioned corridors. Then came big-box power centers along highways with lower rents and endless parking. Strip malls closer to home peeled away everyday errands. And humming beneath all of it, e-commerce started siphoning off the most profitable categories, one UPS truck at a time. Because Sears's story is one of attachment to place, the damage hit deeper. The company was no longer just a retailer choosing where to sell. It was a landlord, an asset manager, a holder of long-dated commitments tied to a single way of shopping. Closing a dying store didn't just mean walking away from some sales. It meant admitting that a supposedly fortress location had turned into a liability that the moat shareholders loved was filling with mud. Selling or repurposing those boxes was slow, political, and expensive. Meanwhile, Walmart's empire rode a different logic. It could chase new traffic flows, build on cheaper land outside town, reconfigure formats, pivot into supercenters, and then into e-commerce without sentimental attachment to any one address. Sears, at times inspiring and at times chilling in its confidence, treated the mall as destiny. And here's the quiet horror. When your balance sheet is packed with properties welded to a fading ritual of weekend shopping, how do you stand up in front of Wall Street and admit that the moat has become a prison? The answer to that question would drag Sears into an even more ruthless phase of its life, where the real business stopped being retail at all. So when the real business stopped being retail, a new kind of king stepped in. One who didn't dream of selling more washing machines, but of slicing up the empire itself. His name was Eddie Lampert, a hedge fund manager who looked at Sears and Kmart and didn't see a fading family brand. He saw a balance sheet packed with assets. In 2005, he merged the two, promising synergy, discipline, and a glorious turnaround that would rival Walmart's rise. On paper, it sounded almost heroic. There was a time when Sears, Kmart, and Walmart had similar sales. Lampert told Wall Street He could unlock hidden value and restore the crown. His story is one of spreadsheets, not store aisles. He believed that if every division competed for capital like a miniature company, the whole would become lean, efficient, ruthless. So he broke Sears into internal business units that bid against each other, as if the appliance team and the clothing team were rival hedge fund positions rather than departments serving the same customer. In practice, this market inside the company turned daily life into a zero-sum game. Managers hoarded information, sabotaged cooperation, and fought over money that kept shrinking. Because the real focus wasn't on reinventing retail, it was on financial engineering. Lampert treated real estate, brands, and credit operations as the true prize. Stores were not sacred places where American families shopped. They were options on land values and licensing deals. So the asset sales began. Malls were sold and leased back. Properties were spun into separate entities. Cost-cutting swept through payroll, maintenance, and training. It generated cash, yes, short-term, impressive, headline-ready. But the stores themselves grew dimmer, dirtier, emptier. Roofs leaked, escalators broke, shelves sat half-stocked, while Walmart poured billions into logistics, data systems, and relentless price pressure. One side was quietly stripping the copper out of the walls. The other was rebuilding the entire house. Then came the brands, the ones that had once made Sears feel untouchable. Craftsman, the iconic tool line that generations of fathers trusted, was sold off to Stanley Black & Decker. Lands' End, a rare bright spot with loyal customers and real margin, was spun out as its own company. It's an example of what happens when the crown jewels are seen as liquidation inventory rather than the foundation of renewal. Each deal brought in more money. Each deal made Sears less unique. Here's the pattern interrupt. From the outside, it could still look clever. The stock occasionally popped. Analysts praised unlocking value. But inside the stores, employees watched their world hollow out. At times inspiring and at times chilling, this was capitalism turning inward, feeding on itself. While Walmart reinvested in supercenters, supply chain tech, and wages for a giant workforce, Sears was pawning off its legacy piece by piece. By the time the cash flows faded and the properties were gone, what remained was a legal shell wrapped around tired locations and fading memories. The crown hadn't just been lost to a stronger rival, it had been quietly cashed out. The next phase would show what happens when even that shell can't stand up to reality anymore. By the time Sears was cashing out its memories, Walmart was quietly doing something far more dangerous than selling cheap detergent. It was turning itself into infrastructure. Not only the biggest retailer in America, but the largest private employer on earth, with over 2 million people on the payroll and a blue-vested presence within driving distance of most Americans. There was a time when a trip to Sears felt like an event. A drive to the mall, escalators, catalogs, maybe a new appliance for the family. Walmart rewrote that rhythm. It became the weekly, sometimes daily, errand. Groceries, clothes, prescriptions, oil changes, all under fluorescent lights, all wired back into one central brain. Because of that relentless spread into small towns, exurbs, and then suburbs, Walmart's empire stopped being just a chain of stores and started to look like a public utility that never needed a vote. Underneath those aisles sat the real story: trucks, warehouses, and data. Walton had obsessed over logistics the way Rockefeller obsessed over railroads. Regional distribution centers fed supercenters with military regularity. A private trucking fleet crisscrossed the country. Satellites linked scanners in rural Arkansas to executives in Bentonville. The result was a shadow logistics backbone, moving goods faster and cheaper than many official systems, quietly determining which communities had access to which products and at what price. Because of that network, suppliers didn't just sell to Walmart, they were rearranged by Walmart. A manufacturer that wanted access to those shelves had to redesign packaging, slash costs, and sometimes uproot entire operations to lower-wage regions or overseas factories. It's an example of what happens when one buyer becomes so powerful that it can dictate not only the price, but the geography of global manufacturing. Factories closed in Ohio, opened in Guangdong, and the invisible thread running between them was a purchase order from Bentonville. Then came the data. Every barcode scan was a vote. Every out of stock a warning light. Over time, Walmart's information systems stopped merely tracking what sold and began to shape what even existed to be sold. If a product couldn't move volume through those stores, it might not survive at all. In that sense, Walmart wasn't just deciding what got shelf space, it was ghost editing the consumer economy itself, at times inspiring, and at times chilling in its efficiency. Meanwhile, Sears' once mighty footprint was shrinking into irrelevance. While Walmart was wiring up a private satellite network and teaching suppliers to dance to its tempo, Sears was closing anchors, selling real estate, and arguing over brand licensing. The company that had once been America's retail infrastructure was now a tenant in other people's malls. Let me take you back to that image of the crown. Sears had worn it from the age of mail order to the age of malls. Walmart claimed it by turning retail into a kind of national utility for goods, labor, and data. The next step would show what happens when that utility model collides with a new kind of network, the internet. When Walmart's everyday low prices rolled into town, they didn't just compete with the local hardware store or the family-owned grocer. They rearranged the entire economic life of the place. There was a time when a small town's power center was its main street. After Walmart, the power moved to a single box on the edge of the highway. Let me take you back to that shift. For a century, Sears had been everywhere without destroying everywhere. The catalog brought wealth into rural communities by letting families buy what only cities once had, while the local merchants still sold feed, fixed tractors, knew every name. When Sears stores did arrive, they usually anchored malls that pulled in dozens of other tenants. The empire expanded, but the ecosystem around it survived. Walmart's model was different. One massive store, one parking lot, one set of rules. Because of its ruthless efficiency and scale, it could undercut almost anyone on price, which made it beloved by shoppers and lethal to rivals. Hardware stores, clothing boutiques, pharmacies, even regional chains watched their sales bleed away, week after week, until the "For Lease" signs started to multiply on Main Street windows. The character of the town changed from many small signs and faces to one giant logo. Inside the box, the story of work was changing too. Sears, at its peak, had been a ladder into the middle class. Catalog centers, regional warehouses, Chicago headquarters, manufacturing partners across the Midwest. These were stable jobs with benefits, pensions, and the quiet assumption that a person could build a life there. It was an example of what happens when a dominant retailer still thinks like a 1950s corporation. Slow, paternal, imperfect, but aimed at broad middle-class security. Walmart grew up in a harsher era. To keep prices low, wages stayed low. Benefits were limited. Hours were flexible in the way that made planning a family's week almost impossible, and the pressure on suppliers was relentless. Factories that had once made socks in Alabama or toys in Ohio suddenly faced take-it-or-leave-it contracts. Many took it, then moved production offshore to survive, leaving hollowed-out plants and unemployment lines behind. Others simply closed. Because of this, Walmart became both lifeline and undertow. The same families who lost union jobs at a local plant often ended up working part-time at the supercenter and shopping there too, trading the old promise of one solid paycheck for a maze of low-wage shifts and cheaper groceries. His story is one of national power. Theirs is one of daily arithmetic at the kitchen table. And yet, the moral ledger is not simple. Millions of Americans living near poverty finally gained access to an ocean of goods they could actually afford. Cheaper school supplies, cheaper diapers, cheaper food. At times inspiring, and at times chilling. The rise of Walmart raised a quiet question for every shopper pushing a cart under those fluorescent lights. When we crown a new king of retail, what exactly are we rewarding? And what, town by town, job by job, are we trading away in return? There was a time when walking into Sears felt like stepping into the center of American middle-class life. Not only did it sell the washer, the lawnmower, and the Sunday dress, it sold a quiet promise. Your family was moving up, steadily, safely, predictably. Craftsman meant tools that would outlast your mortgage. Kenmore meant appliances that would keep humming long after the warranty expired. The name on the box was a guarantee, and everyone knew it. Let me take you back to the age of the Sears catalog, when that thick book landed on kitchen tables like a message from a distant empire. Page after page, it translated industrial power into everyday wealth. A house kit you could assemble on your own lot. A suit that made a factory worker look like management. Credit that turned wages into refrigerators and stoves. Sears stood for reliability, for practical quality, for the modest but very real dream that life could be cleaner, easier, more dignified. Then, slowly, the meaning began to leak out. Years of underinvestment turned that once proud promise into a memory. Because executives treated the brand like a bank account to be drawn down instead of a reputation to be defended, stores aged in place, carpets stained, lights dimmed, ceiling tiles yellowed. The Craftsman sign was still there, but the aisle felt tired. Kenmore still existed, but the displays were half-lit, crowded, and strangely quiet. On the sales floor, the erosion was almost physical. Racks jammed with clearance tags, random seasonal promotions taped over old signage, electronics next to tools next to forgotten housewares, all humming under the same weary fluorescent buzz. It was hard to tell what Sears wanted to be. A fashion destination? A hardware store? A bargain basement? The answer, unfortunately, was all of the above, and none with conviction. In a crowded market, a brand that doesn't stand for something sharp and specific effectively stands for nothing at all. Meanwhile, Walmart repeated one simple line like a drumbeat. Everyday low prices on what you actually need. The layout, the signage, the ads on TV, the receipt in your hand, all told the same blunt story about money and power. Come here, save cash, go home. No romance, no soaring middle-class fantasy, but brutally consistent. It's an example of what happens when clarity beats nostalgia. Because of that contrast, Sears began to feel less like a destination and more like a relic. People wandered into when the mall parking lot was already paid for. Shoppers might still trust the old names on the shelves, but the emotional connection had snapped. This wasn't the company that once taught America how to buy a house from a catalog. It was an aging landlord hanging on to space. And then, in a final twist, the very buildings that carried the Sears name would become more valuable than the meaning of the name itself. There was a time when owning the tallest tower in the world meant you were winning. Sears had the skyscraper, the malls, the parking lots, the physical empire. Walmart had something far less glamorous: cables, satellites, and warehouses full of blinking servers. In the new game of retail, the ugly hardware would prove far more powerful than the beautiful buildings. Let me take you back to the moment the paths quietly split. Walmart made a decision that sounded almost boring. Technology would not be a back-office expense. It would be a weapon. Sam Walton poured money, attention, and talent into building internal systems that wrapped around daily life in the store. Point-of-sale terminals feeding central databases, satellite links pushing sales data every few minutes, buyers and store managers staring at the same numbers in near real time. The company treated IT like a core craft, something to master, refine, and defend. Sears, with all its wealth and prestige, went the other way. It was a cost center, a headache to be contained, not a source of power. Instead of building one nervous system, it hired outside vendors and consultants, bolting on projects to the catalog division, the mall stores, the credit and insurance units. Each piece spoke a different language. Each upgrade meant another patch, another delay, another invoice. On paper, the company was modernizing. In practice, it was creating a digital Tower of Babel. The consequences showed up in small, ruthless ways. Reports arrived days or weeks late. Inventory files in one division didn't match what was sitting in another division's stockroom. A buyer might think a line of appliances was selling out, while a warehouse quietly filled with unsold boxes. Just-in-time replenishment, vendor-managed inventory, those sharp modern retail tactics that Walmart turned into an art form, depended on one thing: clean, fast data. Without that, Sears was trying to play chess with half the pieces missing. By the early 2000s, Walmart's private satellite and data networks were the benchmark of the industry, a quiet empire of information humming above and beneath its stores. Thousands of locations, millions of SKUs, and a global web of suppliers were stitched together so tightly that a single barcode scan in a small-town checkout lane could ripple back to a factory schedule in another country. Meanwhile, Sears lagged behind not just Walmart, but even smaller, hungrier rivals that had learned the same lesson about information speed. Here's the pattern interrupt. The company that taught America to shop by mail never truly mastered its own data. It sounds almost like a joke, except it wasn't funny for the employees watching the decline. In modern retail, the real estate you own matters less than the information you can see and act on faster than competitors. That shift would decide who controlled prices, who controlled suppliers, and finally, who controlled the American consumer. And once Walmart owned the data, it could start bending the entire supply chain to its will. Once Walmart owned the data, it didn't just move pallets faster. It rewrote the scoreboard of American retail. And when you zoom out, the scale of that rewrite is almost hard to believe. Let me take you back to the late 1980s. There was a time when Sears, Kmart, and Walmart all looked like they belonged in the same weight class. In 1989, their annual sales were in the same broad neighborhood, each seen as a major player, each with thousands of stores, each talked about as a national force. If you were a Wall Street analyst then, you could squint at the numbers and imagine three rival empires fighting for the same crown. Then the 2000s arrive, and the picture turns lopsided. Walmart's revenue doesn't just edge ahead, it towers. By 2010, Walmart is pulling in over $400 billion a year, while Sears and Kmart, now awkwardly merged, are tiny by comparison, their combined sales a fraction of the Arkansas machine. Not only is Walmart the largest retailer in the world, it's one of the largest companies in history by revenue, with more than 2 million employees and operations spanning multiple continents. How did it get there? By turning retail into an integrated empire. Walmart didn't stop at big boxes in small towns. It built Sam's Club as a membership warehouse engine, squeezing extra money and data from small businesses and higher-income families. It pushed into Mexico, the UK, and beyond, exporting its ruthless obsession with logistics. And as the 2000s rolled on, it began leaning into e-commerce, click and collect, and online grocery. Not perfectly, but relentlessly. All while reinforcing the same core promise: everyday low prices powered by an information grid its rivals couldn't see, let alone copy. Sears, meanwhile, was living a very different story. Its store base kept shrinking. Malls that once felt like cathedrals of middle-class life became half-empty shells, anchored by tired Sears locations with dark corners and aging fixtures. Sales per square foot fell. Instead of pouring money into technology, data, and new formats, leadership chased savings, closing stores, cutting staff, trimming maintenance, selling real estate. Cost-cutting can preserve a balance sheet for a while, but it rarely builds the future. Because of those choices, the crown wasn't just slipping. It had already been handed over, even if some executives refused to say it out loud. Sears still had a famous name, a nostalgic catalog legacy, even the memory of the Sears Tower. But brand memory without operational power is just a story about the past. Walmart controlled the flow of goods, the information, the suppliers, and finally, the expectations of the American consumer. It's an example of what happens when one company treats retail as a living system to be optimized, while another treats it as an inheritance to be defended. And yet, the most brutal phase of Sears' decline and Walmart's quiet transformation into infrastructure was still to come. Sears didn't lose because it couldn't see Walmart. It lost because it couldn't stop being Sears. There was a time when that was its greatest strength, and then, quietly, it became the cage that locked the doors from the inside. This is the innovator's dilemma in retail form. When a company dominates an industry, its life, its money, its power all flow from a specific business model and a specific customer. Change that model too fast, and you risk killing the very empire that feeds you. Keep it too long, and you watch someone else build a new one across the street. For Sears, that trap was lined with marble floors and suburban parking lots. Let me take you back to the 1960s. Sears was the largest retailer in the world, touching roughly 1% of US GDP. Its core customer was the rising American middle class, pushing strollers through climate-controlled malls, paying with Sears credit cards, buying appliances, tools, insurance, even homes. Those customers expected variety, service, and a certain dignity. They did not imagine themselves driving to a concrete box at the edge of a cornfield to save 50 cents on detergent. So when Sam Walton started opening rural discount stores in 1962, the same year Sears launched its mall format, the logic inside Sears was simple and, on paper, rational. Why chase low-margin, small-town shoppers when the real money was in suburban families with steady paychecks and a taste for brand names? Walmart's world looked like poverty. Sears' world looked like wealth. By serving the first, it risked offending the second. Inside the company, the resistance ran even deeper. The executives who ran Sears had grown up on department stores and thick catalogs, not satellites and real-time inventory scans. Their careers, their prestige, their bonuses all came from negotiating with brands, managing floor space, and leveraging real estate, not from shaving half a cent off a supply chain. To them, Walmart's bare concrete floors and pallet displays looked less like the future and more like an insult. Then came diversification. Sears bought Dean Witter for finance, Coldwell Banker for real estate, built a tower that literally scraped the sky. Suddenly, retail was just one division among many. The internal winners were the people doing credit, brokerage, and property deals, not the ones arguing for a ruthless low-price assault on rural America. Walmart-style retail looked low status, low margin, and low priority compared to the glamorous world of money management and skyscrapers. By the time Walmart's satellite-linked, logistics-obsessed model was obviously superior in the 1980s and 1990s, Sears was structurally frozen. Its leases were locked into malls, its culture was locked into the past, its talent was locked into finance. At times inspiring and at times chilling, the story shows how an empire can see the future on paper and still be unable to move its feet. And the real twist is that when Sears finally tried to reinvent itself, it didn't turn into a better Walmart at all. It turned into a museum of what American retail used to be. There was a time when one logo could pull a man off his couch, into his car, and through a mall parking lot on a Saturday morning. For Sears, that logo was Craftsman. Lifetime warranty, solid steel, no-nonsense design. If a socket cracked, you walked in, slapped it on the counter, and walked out with a new one. No receipt, no argument. The tools were good, but the promise was better. Craftsman didn't just sell wrenches, it sold trust. For decades, that trust was a magnet. DIYers, mechanics, electricians, fathers teaching their kids how to fix a first car. Craftsman turned Sears into a ritual. You'd go in for a ratchet set and leave with a lawnmower, some work boots, maybe a refrigerator. It was a quiet empire built drawer by drawer in red metal tool chests across the country. But let me take you back to the moment the ground started to move. While Walmart was wiring up a private satellite network, tracking every hammer and drill bit in near real time, Sears kept Craftsman chained to a shrinking world. Mall anchors, aging catalogs, tired circulars. Distribution stayed narrow, marketing stayed nostalgic. The brand that could have lived in every hardware aisle in America was trapped inside dying real estate. Meanwhile, Walmart was doing something Sears never truly understood. It was turning private labels into weapons. Great Value in groceries, Equate in health, Ozark Trail in outdoor gear, not just cheap knockoffs, but data-tuned products, priced to the penny, placed on the exact shelf where millions of transactions said they would move. Because of that ruthless focus on information and scale, Walmart didn't need a legendary name to sell a screwdriver. It could manufacture its own gravity. Here's the twist that still stings former Sears loyalists. Craftsman, the crown jewel that once drove traffic across a continent, became more valuable outside Sears than inside it. The retail platform had shrunk so much that even its strongest brand couldn't reach its potential. So Sears did the unthinkable for an earlier generation. It sold Craftsman off. The lifetime warranty hero of the tool aisle was monetized in a fire sale, not in a grand expansion. That sale was more than a business decision. It was a confession. His story is one of an empire that had wealth, brands, and history, yet finally had to admit that the platform carrying them was collapsing. Brands that once begged for a place in the Sears catalog now had better options. Walmart's shelves, Walmart's data, Walmart's private labels. It's an example of what happens when distribution power flips. Sears needed icons to pull people in. Walmart had become the place people went first, and the icons were optional. and once a retailer no longer needs famous brands to win. The balance of power in American shopping changes for good. There was a time when Sears didn't just sell America its washing machines and lawnmowers. It sold America its money. While Walmart was perfecting pallets and price tags, Sears was quietly building a parallel financial empire that, for a while, looked even more exciting than retail. Let me take you back to the mid-1980s. Sears already owned Allstate, an insurance company it had incubated since the 1930s, selling auto policies out of tiny desks in its stores. Allstate grew and grew until the tail was almost bigger than the dog. Then Sears launched something new, something bold: Discover Card. No annual fee, cashback rewards, a slick Super Bowl ad. In a world ruled by Visa and MasterCard, Sears tried to crash the party with its own network, its own brand, its own stream of fees. The strange part? It worked. Discover became one of the fastest growing cards in the country, a standalone name in American money culture. Allstate kept compounding, throwing off reliable profits. Compared to the slow grind of opening another mall anchor, hiring another army of clerks, and filling another warehouse with inventory, financial services looked light, scalable, and glamorous. Swipe a card, sign a policy, watch the numbers climb. Inside Sears, the scoreboards reflected that difference. Return on equity, margins, growth rates. Allstate and Discover lit up the slides in executive presentations, while the retail charts looked heavy and tired. Same-store sales inched. Operating costs crept. The catalog that once brought wealth to an entire middle-class family now looked old next to a plastic card that could skim a percentage off every purchase at every store. Wall Street noticed. Analysts who once obsessed over store openings and catalog circulation began talking about the hidden value of Sears' financial assets. The conversation shifted from, "How will Sears reinvent shopping?" to, "What would these businesses be worth if they were freed from this sluggish retailer?" Because of that pressure, and because the numbers made it feel rational, leadership spent more time explaining financial synergies than fixing broken aisles. Then the logic completed its loop. In the 1990s, Sears spun off Allstate. Later, Discover followed. Shareholders got shiny new stocks, Sears got cash, and the market cheered the unlocking of value. But something important walked out the door. The company was left with a weaker core business, shrinking traffic, and no clear story about what it wanted to be. The crown jewels were gone. The tarnished crown remained. His story is one of retail power, but Sears's life at this point is also a warning about money. The very side ventures that looked like salvation, at times inspiring and at times chilling, may have distracted leadership from the ruthless, unglamorous work of reinventing retail. It's an example of what happens when the easy profits feel more urgent than the hard rebuild. Because while Sears was cashing out of finance, Walmart was doubling down on something far less flashy: operations. Because while Sears was cashing out of finance, Walmart was doubling down on something far less flashy: operations. Not just trucks and warehouses, but a whole way of life inside the company built around one fear: the fear of becoming Sears. There was a time when Walmart was the scrappy outsider begging suppliers for attention. By the early 2000s, it was the largest retailer in the world, the largest private employer on earth, and a political lightning rod accused of crushing small towns, underpaying workers, and bullying manufacturers. Inside Bentonville, that brought a new kind of anxiety. When you are the empire, do you still get to play the underdog? Or does complacency quietly move in with the corner office and stock options? Executives argued over that question. Some pushed to squeeze more profit out of the existing machine, to defend the old model of giant boxes, rock-bottom prices, and relentless cost cuts. Others warned that this was exactly how giants died. The debates were not abstract philosophy. They were about whether to spend billions on invisible technology, to slow earnings today to avoid Sears' fate tomorrow. So Walmart poured money into data and wires instead of marble lobbies. It expanded its private satellite network, built real-time analytics that told managers which brand of detergent was moving in which zip code, and opened massive regional distribution centers tuned like engines. Then came e-commerce. After underestimating Amazon, Walmart snapped awake, buying Jet.com, India's Flipkart, and a portfolio of online brands, folding them into a digital storefront that could ride on top of its physical empire. Let me take you back to Sears, the company that once owned America's mailboxes and then missed the internet. Inside Walmart, that ghost was brought up in meetings as a warning. Because of that fear, leadership began talking about reputation as another kind of infrastructure. Public anger over wages, erratic schedules, and thin benefits was no longer just a PR headache. It threatened the company's license to operate. Walmart raised minimum pay, expanded health coverage and education programs, and talked, sometimes awkwardly, about opportunity for its massive workforce. The money was real, but so was the calculation. Lose the public, lose the power. At the same time, sustainability moved from charity project to core strategy. Renewable energy investments, more efficient trucking fleets, packaging cuts, supply chain audits for emissions and labor abuses. On paper, these looked like costs. In practice, they were insurance policies against regulation, consumer revolt, and the slow erosion of brand. In speeches, CEOs drew careful lines. They rarely named Sears directly, but the silhouette was unmistakable. They spoke about past giants that forgot the core game, that chased financial engineering instead of operational excellence, that assumed their wealth and power would last forever. His story is one of warning, they implied, at times inspiring and at times chilling. And it's an example of what happens when a company stops being paranoid. Yet a quieter question hangs over Walmart's story. Has it truly internalized the lesson? Or is it simply standing where Sears once stood, at an earlier point on the same unbreakable-looking arc? The answer depends on what happens when the next revolution hits retail harder than e-commerce ever did. By the time the answer arrived, it didn't look like a revolution at all. It looked like a press release. On an October morning in 2018, Sears quietly filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, and the empire that once helped move 1% of America's entire GDP slipped into legal hospice care. Outside the headlines, the scene was almost eerily calm. There was a time when a Sears grand opening could jam traffic for miles, when families drove in from small towns just to ride the escalators and walk through the bright, endless aisles. In 2018, the cameras showed something else. Echoing corridors, gated-off sections, fluorescent lights buzzing over empty appliance rows, and once busy malls now half vacant. With Sears as the darkened anchor no one wanted to admit was already gone. Let me take you back to what that contrast really meant. At its peak in the 1960s, Sears alone was estimated to account for around 1% of US GDP, a concentration of money and power almost unthinkable for a retailer today. Yet, by the time of the filing, Sears' share of American retail had shrunk to a rounding error. Many younger shoppers had barely set foot in a store. For them, Sears was not a place in their life. It was a logo on an old wrench in their parents' garage. On paper, the 2018 bankruptcy looked like the dramatic fall. In reality, the crown had been handed over years earlier. Walmart had already passed Sears in sales, in influence, in sheer cultural centrality. While Sears was selling off brands and real estate to stay alive, Walmart was turning into infrastructure. The largest private employer in the world, a logistics machine feeding millions of households every week, a place where paychecks, groceries, and school supplies all flowed through the same fluorescent funnel. This is how empires usually end, not with a single cannon blast, but with a slow erosion, while a new power quietly builds in places the old guard isn't watching. Sears had ruled mailboxes, then malls. Walmart conquered rural highways, then distribution centers, then data. One empire was arguing about catalog layouts while the other was wiring a private satellite network to track every box of detergent. Here's the pattern interrupt. The Chapter 11 filing did not cause Sears' fall. It was the paperwork catching up to a reality Walmart had been living in since the late 1980s. The legal declaration simply marked the moment when the story on the balance sheet finally matched the story shoppers had been telling with their feet for decades. And yet, even at the end, there was something at times inspiring and at times chilling about how quietly the transfer happened. No coronation, no dramatic duel between titans. Just one giant fading into court documents, while another, wearing the same everyday low prices smile, stood exactly where the last king once stood, waiting for the next challenger to appear. There was a time when it felt like Sears didn't just sell to America, it choreographed how America lived. From the mail-order barn in Kansas to the mall in New Jersey, its empire seemed woven into the country's daily life. So when that empire cracked, the easy story was, history moved on. Nothing could be done. On paper, the macro forces were brutal. Suburbanization pulled people out of dense downtowns. Then big box formats swept in with gigantic parking lots, concrete shells, and endless aisles. Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Costco. A new retail aristocracy rose, engineered for cars, highways, and scale. Then e-commerce arrived, turning every living room into a showroom and every phone into a cash register. For any traditional department store chained to aging malls, declining foot traffic, and high fixed costs, the math turned ruthless very quickly. But here is where the story gets at times inspiring and at times chilling. Because while those forces were real, they did not dictate that Sears had to surrender the crown exactly the way it did. Competitors faced the same tides and still learned to swim. Sears, with all its money, brand power, and history, often chose to stand still. Instead of pouring capital into logistics and information systems, Sears spent the 1970s and 80s chasing financial services glamour. It bought Dean Witter, Coldwell Banker, built a tower that scraped the sky, and told itself the future was financial supermarkets. Meanwhile, in Arkansas, Sam Walton was wiring up a private satellite network, refining just-in-time inventory, and treating data as the real product. One empire treated real estate and finance as the prize. The other treated information moving faster than competitors as life or death. Sears also clung to the mall as if the format itself were sacred. Even as anchor stores started to feel less like destinations and more like obligations, it doubled down on being the dependable box at the end of a fading corridor. There was no bold pivot into off-mall big boxes at scale, no aggressive experiment with lean, high-turnover formats that could go toe-to-toe with Walmart on price and convenience. And then there was the cruelest irony. The company that had once ruled America's mailboxes, that had literally taught generations to shop from a distance, almost entirely missed the internet. Let me take you back to the late 1990s. Sears still had catalog DNA, warehouses, and customer trust. It could have turned that heritage into a dominant e-commerce platform, a kind of Amazon before Amazon. Instead, it wound down the catalog, underinvested online, and treated the web as an add-on to a shrinking mall business. Layer on rapid leadership turnover, shifting slogans, and strategy of the year plans, and the picture sharpens. There was no clear, coherent vision of what Sears should be in the 21st century. Not the cheapest, not the most convenient, not the most premium, just there. Change was inevitable. Malls were never going to rule forever. But the way Sears lost its crown, slowly, passively, piece by piece, was not. Because while history sets the tide, leaders still choose whether to build a better ship. And someone else, watching all of this in real time, was quietly doing exactly that. That someone else is the most dangerous character in any empire's story. The quiet outsider who studies the current king not with awe, but with a notebook. If a mail-order catalog in Chicago could be toppled by a discount box in a small Arkansas town, who is sitting in a co-working space right now, quietly building the tools to dethrone Walmart? There was a time when owning the real estate, the parking lots, and the Saturday crowds meant owning American shopping. Today, the battlefield is stranger. The next challenger might not care about aisles at all. It might be an e-commerce giant that treats physical stores as nothing more than warehouses with better lighting. An ultra-fast delivery network that turns every corner store into a node, or a data-rich platform that sees retail as just one more app on a screen. Not the friendly neighborhood merchant, but an invisible layer that routes money, attention, and packages with machine precision. Let me take you back to what made Sears terrifying in its prime. Railroads, mail systems, and a national catalog turned a Chicago office into a portal for rural families drowning in poverty and choice-starved towns. The company rode those infrastructure waves so well that at its peak, it touched around 1% of US GDP. Today, the new railroads are cloud computing, mobile payments, and AI-driven personalization. Whoever controls those tracks can beam a hyper-targeted storefront into every hand on Earth. Think about it. Cloud servers replace warehouses. Mobile wallets replace checkout lines. Recommendation engines, trained on billions of clicks, replace the friendly clerk who knows what you like. It's an example of what happens when the plumbing of daily life quietly shifts. Power follows the pipes. And somewhere, a founder is less obsessed with how many stores they opened this quarter, and more obsessed with how many milliseconds it takes their algorithm to predict a purchase. Walmart is not Sears in 1975, half asleep in its tower. It is pouring billions into online grocery, into its own cloud services, into robotic warehouses, and last-mile delivery. It has data centers, AI teams, and a logistics web that already spans the globe. On paper, this looks safe. Then again, on paper, Sears invested too. Financial services, early online portals, even experiments with home computers. The problem was never that Sears did nothing. The problem was that it lost the plot. Because the plot is always the same. Empires fall when the metric that matters most changes, and the people in charge keep optimizing the old one. Somewhere right now, in a small office far from Bentonville, a founder is staring at a dashboard number that Walmart's board barely glances at. When that number finally matters more than store traffic or quarterly same-store sales, the crown will quietly start to move. And the twist is, by the time everyone notices which number it is, it may already be too late to catch up. There was a time when the most powerful retailer in America didn't own a single store most of its customers ever saw. Sears rode an invisible network, railroads, mail routes, and a thick brick of paper that landed in the family kitchen like a visiting god. Let me take you back to the late 1800s, when distance was a prison for rural families. Local general stores had high prices, limited choice, and plenty of attitude. Sears flipped that. The railroad made shipping cheap, the expanding postal system made delivery reliable, and the catalog turned isolation into opportunity. A farmer in Nebraska could order the same stove as a banker in Chicago, the same suit, the same watch, even an entire house shipped in pieces. Because Sears treated those new rails and mailbags as its bloodstream, not a side hustle, money and power flowed toward its empire. Then the map changed again. After World War II, the interstate highway system carved concrete arteries across the country, and America moved to the suburbs. Sears followed with malls and giant department stores, but someone else was watching the roads more closely. In 1962, the same year Sears opened its first mall-based store, Sam Walton opened the first Walmart in Rogers, Arkansas, pointed not at big cities, but at small towns everyone else ignored. His story is one of relentless logistics. Walmart built its own distribution centers, ran a private trucking fleet, wired up a private satellite network in the 1980s, and pushed barcode scanning and real-time inventory long before it was fashionable. Data wasn't an afterthought, it was the operating system. Because of that ruthless focus on information moving faster and cheaper, Walmart could crush prices, replenish shelves overnight, and finally turn those sleepy highways into a weapon. Here's the pattern interrupt. The company that taught America to shop by mail, that once accounted for about 1% of US GDP, completely missed the next invisible network, the Internet. Sears treated online retail, modern analytics, and supply chain tech as side projects, while Walmart retooled its entire life around scanning data, vendor portals, and just-in-time delivery. It's an example of what happens when an empire mistakes its buildings for its power source. Now a third wave is rewriting the rules again. Cloud infrastructure, smartphones, AI, and same-day delivery networks are turning convenience into an expectation, not a luxury. The new giants are the ones treating server capacity, recommendation algorithms, and last-mile routing the way Sears once treated railroads and Walmart treated satellites. They are not adding e-commerce. They are rebuilding retail around code and couriers. At times inspiring and at times chilling, this pattern keeps repeating. Those who treat new infrastructure as decoration lose. Those who bet the whole company on it quietly accumulate wealth and influence until, suddenly, they are the system. For viewers, understanding these waves isn't trivia, it's a forecast. Watch who is reorganizing their entire business around today's invisible networks, and you'll see who is already reaching for the next crown. There was a time when Sears looked like proof that capitalism could wear a friendly face. It sold the dream of a stable middle-class life, shipped it to your farmhouse mailbox, and then built glowing malls where families wandered under skylights and escalators. But behind the warm catalog drawings and holiday sales was a machine quietly centralizing money and power on a national scale. Let me take you back to the catalog years. Sears didn't just sell products, it scripted a way of life. A farmer could order a suit, a stove, even an entire house, and pay over time. Credit, installment plans, generous guarantees. On paper, it was empowerment. In practice, it locked millions of households into a single corporate ecosystem where Sears decided what modern looked like and harvested the profits from every upgrade. As the empire grew, the moral balance shifted. The company that once obsessively chased customer trust began obsessively chasing quarterly returns. Financial services, insurance, real estate, the Sears Tower itself. Money flowed into abstractions, Floor staff were cut, stores were neglected, and the middle-class dream turned into fluorescent fatigue. Because leadership chose financial engineering over operational renewal, short-term earnings looked clever while long-term resilience quietly rotted. Walmart's story is one of a different promise and a different cost. Sam Walton didn't offer marble floors. He offered everyday low prices and a ruthless war on waste. Smaller towns that had never seen a Sears mall suddenly had a one-stop box on the edge of the highway. Families saved real money, week after week. The trade-off hid in the shadows: local hardware stores, grocers, and clothing shops folding as one company's logistics system rewrote the rules of survival. To deliver those prices, Walmart squeezed everything: wages, supplier margins, delivery times, global factories. Because of its relentless bargaining power, manufacturers shifted production overseas, chasing costs down the ladder, while communities at home watched stable jobs turn into part-time schedules and thin benefits. It's an example of what happens when operational genius is married to a single metric: lower prices at almost any human cost. Both giants kept making the same bargain in different costumes. When Sears chose to please Wall Street instead of reinvesting in stores, it traded long-term loyalty for short-term money. When Walmart pushed just-in-time perfection and fragile, far-flung supply chains, it traded resilience for speed and scale. Shareholders were thrilled. Neighborhoods, workers, and small competitors absorbed the risk. And viewers were not just bystanders. Every time a family drove past a downtown shop to save $10 at a supercenter or clicked order instead of visiting a local store, they voted in this moral ledger. Convenience beat conscience. Price beat patience. The companies followed those votes with cold precision. So the story of Sears and Walmart is, at times inspiring and at times chilling. Inspiring because focused execution turned catalogs and trucks into nationwide infrastructure. Chilling because power detached from responsibility so smoothly that it felt normal. In the next chapter, that same pattern will collide with a new force: the digital marketplace that makes even Walmart look slow. So when that digital marketplace finally arrived, Sears faced the most dangerous question in business: what game are you actually playing? There was a time when Sears answered with catalogs, railroads, and mailboxes. By the 1980s, the answer had shifted, quietly and fatally, to office towers, credit cards, and mall leases. Walmart, meanwhile, never lost the plot. The game was moving boxes and data faster than anyone else, logistics and information. Everything else was decoration. That is the first lesson for any builder. If the story in your head is, "We own prime locations," while the real game is, "We own the flow of goods and knowledge," the ending has already been written. Sears thought it was a real estate portfolio with a store attached. Walmart behaved like a routing algorithm that happened to have doors. One treated retail as an asset class. The other treated it as a living system. The second lesson sits in front of every screen. Sears invented American remote shopping, then treated the internet like a side hobby. A website here, a half-hearted online catalog there, while the real energy went into financial services and squeezing money out of aging malls. It's an example of what happens when the technology that should be the main event is parked in a corner lab, starved of power, and buried under committees. For entrepreneurs and executives, that pattern is at times inspiring and at times chilling. Inspiring because it shows how early insight can build an empire from nothing. Chilling because the same empire can be lost by assuming the next revolution will politely wait its turn in the budget cycle. If a new technology can rewrite how your customer discovers, pays, or receives, it is not adjacent. It is the plot. The third lesson: protect and evolve the core. Sears had a brand that reached into nearly every American home, a customer relationship built over generations, and operational knowledge that once rivaled the railroads. Then the focus drifted. Insurance, brokerage, real estate, financial engineering. Money today, erosion tomorrow. Walmart did the opposite. Every new move, satellites, barcodes, data analytics, fed back into the same engine. Lower prices, fuller shelves, tighter logistics. To avoid handing over your crown, stay close to ground truth. Sam Walton spent his life walking aisles, talking to clerks, riding in trucks. Sears executives spent theirs riding elevators in the tallest building in the world. One management team saw empty shelves and angry faces. The other saw smooth dashboards and rising property values. Only one of those realities was real. So here is the uncomfortable audit. In your company, in your career, where are you acting like Sears at its complacent peak? Treating the old moat as eternal, treating new tools as toys, trusting the spreadsheet more than the customer. And where are you acting like early Walmart, obsessed with flow, close to the floor, ruthless about serving one clear promise? Because the next chapter of this story will show what happens when someone new asks those questions and refuses to answer them the old way. So before the charts, the bankruptcies, and the business school case studies, this becomes something simpler, a question about your own life. What era of American shopping are you from? Because this empire didn't just move numbers on a spreadsheet, it moved memories inside a family. There was a time when power meant paper. If you're a little older, let me take you back to the weight of that Sears catalog landing on the kitchen table like a phone book of desire. Hundreds of pages, tiny drawings, prices in neat columns, the promise that money plus patience could summon almost anything to your doorstep. Maybe you circled toys in red pen. Maybe your parents compared washing machines. Maybe Christmas and wish book were the same phrase. For millions, Sears wasn't a store. It was the American dream printed in ink. Then there were the mall trips, the big weekend outing, walking in from a sea of cars toward those glowing red letters. Sears as the anchor, the thing that made the whole mall feel legitimate. New appliances on the ground floor, tools and lawnmowers humming quietly, clothes upstairs under bright fluorescent lights. Outside, the Sears Tower scraped the sky, a literal monument that said this company, this way of shopping, was permanent, untouchable, eternal. But maybe your era begins with a different pilgrimage. Not to the mall, but down a highway, past cornfields and billboards, until that blue Walmart sign appeared like a low-cost oasis. Everything under one roof. Groceries, socks, tires, a goldfish if the day went really off script. You walked out with more than you planned and less money than you expected to spend, and that felt like magic. Everyday low prices stopped being a slogan and started being the default assumption about how the world worked. For some, Walmart wasn't just where money was spent, it was where money was earned. First jobs behind a register, stocking shelves at midnight, learning how hard retail work actually is when the empire of cheap meets the reality of human fatigue. Others had that same baptism at Sears, selling tools on commission, fitting shoes, watching the Saturday crowds thin year by year. Two different uniforms, one shared lesson about power and how quickly it shifts. And then, a pattern interrupt. If you're younger, how often have you actually walked into either one? For a lot of people, the main mall memory is that moment when it felt empty. Dark storefronts, echoing footsteps, a half-closed Sears with clearance signs that never came down. The everything under one roof that really matters now lives in a phone, 2 taps, a search bar, a package on the porch. It's an example of what happens when institutions that feel permanent quietly slide into background noise, then into nostalgia, then into history. His story is one of oil and railroads. This one is about catalogs and concrete, but the pattern rhymes. So in the comments, lay down your chapter. First catalog you remember. First Walmart run. First job at either. The year your local mall started to die. Because the next phase of this story won't just explain who took the crown from Walmart, it will show who's already building the next tower, where you can't see the top yet. There was a time when one company didn't just sell to America, it organized American life. Sears went from a single catalog to an empire that reached into farmhouses, tenements, and then the glowing corridors of every new suburban mall. It taught families how to furnish a living room, how to buy a fridge on credit, how to dream in monthly installments. Let me take you back to that arc. First, the catalog innovator, hacking the 19th century postal system to erase distance and poverty as excuses. Then the middle-class empire builder, laying down craftsman homes, Kenmore appliances, and store charge cards like rails across a continent of rising paychecks. Then the mall anchor, parking its logo at the heart of every new shopping cathedral. Then, drunk on its own wealth and confidence, the financial conglomerate, chasing money through insurance, brokerage, and a skyscraper so tall it literally renamed the Chicago skyline. Finally, the hollowed-out brand, stripped for parts, drifting into Chapter 11, while its old tower quietly changed its name. Across the map, a very different story. Sam Walton starts in the places Sears barely noticed, a rural discounter in forgotten towns, stacking cheap goods high and moving them fast. Walmart becomes a logistics fanatic, wiring up warehouses, inventing cross-docking rhythms, building a private satellite network that lets Bentonville see sales in near real time. Not glamorous, just relentless. From there, it turns into a data-driven operator, squeezing pennies out of every mile of trucking, every pallet, every barcode scan, until one day it isn't just a chain of stores. It is the national infrastructure of everyday consumption. The crown doesn't fall in a single moment. It's handed over through missed revolutions. Sears flirts with big box formats, but never fully commits, while Walmart lives inside the supercenter, turning it into a small city under fluorescent light. Supply chain tech? Sears underinvests, tangled in fragmented systems and legacy habits, while Walmart treats information as the real inventory. Data analytics? One side has hunches and hierarchy. The other has hourly reports and instant price changes. And the internet, the cruelest irony of all, the company that taught America to shop by mail misses the one network that could have made its catalog immortal. Underneath the charts, the cultures were telling the story long before the numbers. Sears drifts into complacent bureaucracy, endless committees, slow decisions, managers who manage other managers. Walmart builds a ruthless operational discipline, store walks at dawn, obsession with shrink and sales per square foot, a religion of everyday low prices enforced by data, not memos. When the world shifts, Sears tries to save itself with financial engineering and real estate games. Walmart, feeling the ground move, throws money and talent at e-commerce, at times inspiring and at times chilling in its determination to never be the next Sears. Because this isn't just about two logos on fading shopping bags, it's an example of what happens when ambition, technology, and complacency collide. Power moves quietly, then all at once, The next chapter will ask a harder question. If Sears handed its crown to Walmart, who is already reaching for Walmarts? And what happens to everyone living under that new empire when they finally close their doors for the night? So now, turn the camera around. Instead of watching Sears and Walmart like characters in a distant story, imagine every giant around you wearing a flickering crown. Amazon, Apple, JP Morgan, TikTok, Costco, even the grocery chain down the street. Each one is riding an invisible wave of infrastructure. The only real question is, which wave, and how long before it crashes? There was a time when Sears rode railroads and mail-order catalogs the way Walmart would later ride highways and satellites. Today's giants are surfing different oceans: cloud computing, AI models, payment rails, global supply chains, creator platforms. To think like an investor or a founder, not just a consumer, ask one ruthless question. What infrastructure are they quietly wiring into the world while everyone else argues about ad campaigns? Let me take you back to the mental model buried in this story. Sears treated its catalog network, its credit arm, its mall real estate as the backbone of a new empire. Walmart treated its distribution centers, its private satellite network, its data terminals in every store as weapons. So when you look at a tech platform or a financial firm today, ask, is their app just a storefront? Or is it the front door to a logistics, data, or payments machine that runs underneath entire industries? Because of that, another question becomes dangerous to ignore. Are they treating data and technology as expenses to be trimmed, or as the sharp edge of power? When quarterly calls obsess over cost cuts and synergies, but say almost nothing about supply chain visibility, recommendation engines, or new channels, that's late Sears energy. When a company spends real money wiring sensors into warehouses, building its own chips, or owning delivery vans, that's early Walmart behavior, at times inspiring and at times chilling. You can even play a simple game. Which companies feel like early Sears? Scrappy? Focused? Building one core system that makes life easier for millions of ordinary families, even if the brand still looks small. And which feel like late Sears, diversified into 20 businesses, addicted to financial engineering, announcing partnerships instead of infrastructure. One is building a crown from the inside out. The other is polishing jewels while the throne quietly rots. Use the Sears versus Walmart lens the next time a headline flashes by. A streaming service launches a free tier, a fintech rolls out a debit card, a retailer experiments with drone delivery. Who is quietly building logistics, data, or new channels that incumbents dismiss as toys? Who is wiring themselves closer to the customer's daily life, and who is drifting closer to their spreadsheets? Because his story is one of crowns that move before anyone admits they're loose. Spotting the next transfer means watching the pipes, not the billboards. In the next section, the camera will zoom in on a new challenger already tugging at Walmart's crown, and what that means for every empire that thinks its reign will finally last forever. So before the camera zooms in on that new challenger, pause for a second and look at the crown that already fell. Because this isn't just Sears and Walmart's story, it's the story of everyone watching. There was a time when the Sears catalog was the internet of American life. So which era feels like home to you? The catalog age, where families circled dreams in ink at the kitchen table. The mall anchor age, where Sears sat at one end, JCPenney at the other, and Saturday meant walking under fluorescent lights. The Walmart big box age, where the blue vests, concrete floors, and everyday low prices ruled the town. Or the online age, where the mall is a memory and the cart lives on a screen. Let me take you back to your own first chapter in this empire. Maybe it was a first big purchase from Sears, a washing machine that finally ended the weekly laundromat trip, a Kenmore fridge that hummed in the background of every family argument and birthday. Maybe it was a first job at Walmart, stocking shelves at midnight, learning how money, time, and power move in a place that never really sleeps. Or maybe it was the moment you walked through your local mall and realized half the gates were down, the food court was half empty, and the anchor that once felt immortal had turned into a clearance maze. Drop that story in the comments. Names of towns, years, the little details. Think of the comment section as an archive of lived retail history, a record of how ordinary lives brushed up against $1 trillion of wealth and a collapsing empire at the same time. His story is one of charts and headlines. Your story is receipts, pay stubs, and parking lots. Now look forward. Which company today looks most like Sears before the fall, polished and confident? Sure, the crown is welded on. Is it a streaming giant, a smartphone maker, a marketplace that owns your search bar and your front porch? And which underdog feels like early Walmart, out on the edge, unfashionable, quietly building the pipes everyone else will one day depend on? Because this whole video is at times inspiring and at times chilling, it's an example of what happens when an empire forgets that crowns move. Share this with someone who still believes today's giants are invincible, who thinks a tower, a logo, or a market cap guarantees safety. Then scroll through the comments and watch a different kind of balance sheet. Memories, warnings, predictions. Keep those predictions ready. In a moment, the lens will swing from your stories to the new contender, already learning from Sears' fall and Walmart's rise. And the twist is who's quietly training to take their crown next. So let me take you back to where this story began. A single spike of glass and steel, planted in the middle of Chicago. The Sears Tower. Not only was it the tallest building in the world, it was a monument to a company so dominant it touched almost every American life, from the kitchen table catalog to the mortgage on the house. That tower said, "This is permanent. This empire is carved into the skyline." Now tilt the camera. No glittering spire, just endless rectangles. Walmart's world is low-slung warehouses, supercenters, and anonymous data centers humming on the edge of town. Miles of concrete, blinking servers, trucks sliding in and out of loading bays. Less spectacle, more circulation. Less, look up at us. More, you can't live your daily life without passing through us. There was a time when power wanted to be seen from 100 miles away. Skyscrapers, marble lobbies, a logo at the top of the world. Then power realized it was safer buried in logistics networks, invisible databases, and private satellite feeds. Sears built a tower. Walmart built a nervous system. The result is the same: control over how money, products, and attention move. Every era builds monuments to its own idea of power. For one generation, it's the Sears catalog on the kitchen table and a tower on the horizon. For another, it's a fluorescent supercenter off the highway that never closes. For this one, it's server farms in the desert, fulfillment centers the size of small towns, and apps that feel free but quietly tax every transaction. His story is one of mail-order dreams. Walmart's is one of barcodes and bandwidth. The next will be something even harder to see. And here is the pattern interrupt. The next monument probably doesn't look like a monument at all. Somewhere, right now, a founder in a shared office is wiring together data, payments, and attention in a way that makes big box retail look as old as a railroad timetable. Somewhere, a platform that just helps you scroll, stream, or save a few dollars is quietly mapping your life in real time. It's an example of what happens when convenience feels harmless until the old kings notice their lines are empty. Because of this, the most haunting question isn't who wins today. It's whether today's kings will even notice when they lose. When the crown finally slips. When a logo fades from the skyline. When a warehouse goes dark. Will they remember the moment they handed it over? Was it the missed technology, the complacent meeting, the small rival they laughed at and ignored? This series follows those handovers. From towers to warehouses to whatever comes next, at times inspiring and at times chilling, these stories show how power is built, lost, and transferred in plain sight. So keep watching, look past the monuments, and pay attention to whoever is quietly building the world you'll wake up in tomorrow.